Welcome. Tonight, our journey takes us back deep into the Paleozoic past to an age so remote it feels like another planet entirely. We travel to a time long before the first dinosaur left a footprint, before the great coal forests grew, even before fish, as we know them, had truly claimed the seas. We are journeying to a world where the oceans were silent in a different way. A world whose rhythm was dictated not by fin or fluke, but by jointed limbs and hardened shells. We are going to the age of the Eurypterids, the creatures we call the giant sea scorpions. This is not a tale of familiar monsters. It is a voyage into an alien ocean, a shallow, warm, and perhaps murky world, where the very apex of the food chain, the most dominant, fearsome, and sophisticated predator, was an arthropod, a relative of modern spiders and scorpions, but scaled up to sizes that challenge our understanding of biological limits. Imagine a world where the largest hunters were not vertebrates, but immense, armor-plated creatures, some reaching the length of a human, or even larger. Creatures with segmented bodies, stalked eyes, grasping claws near their mouths, and powerful, oar-like paddles to propel them through the water. For over 150 million years, these sea scorpions flourished, diversified, and dominated the aquatic ecosystems of our planet. They were not a minor curiosity, they were a global dynasty. They evolved into a dazzling and sometimes terrifying array of forms, from small, scuttling bottom dwellers to colossal, open-water predators. Tonight, we will submerge ourselves into these lost, ancient seas of the Ordovician, Silurian, and Devonian periods. We will trace the anatomy of these strange, armored beings, exploring the function of their paddle limbs and the mystery of their tail spikes. We will meet the true giants, like Pterygotus and the awe-inspiring Jaekelopterus, the largest arthropod known to have ever existed, a creature of almost mythological proportions. We will explore the mystery of their vast, fossilized gatherings. Were they truly swarming? Or was something else perhaps more intimate, drawing them together in the millions? And we will witness the slow, quiet twilight of their long reign, as new predators, the armored-jawed fishes, rose to challenge their dominance, eventually pushing this ancient dynasty into the shadows long before the great Permian extinction finally closed the book on their story. This is a journey into the quiet, alien depths of an ocean ruled by armor. It is a story of a different kind of predator, a different kind of king, one that rose from the lineage of insects and spiders to rule the world. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It is always a deep pleasure to know who is joining us from around the world for this voyage into the deep past. Now, dim the lights. Perhaps turn on a fan for that soft background hum. Imagine it as the sound of a slow, ancient current flowing through a shallow sea 400 million years ago. Let the familiar world recede, and let's ease into tonight's journey together as we dive deep into the silent, armored ocean of the sea scorpions. To truly understand the Eurypterids, the sea scorpions, we must first travel back to the time when they reached their zenith. We must leave our familiar Cenozoic and Mesozoic worlds behind, push past the age of dinosaurs, past even the great coal forests of the Carboniferous, and the rise of the first amphibians. We journey deep, deep into the Paleozoic Era, to the Silurian period, beginning roughly 443 million years ago. This is a world so ancient it is almost impossible to picture. The map of the Earth is utterly alien. The continents we know do not exist. In their place are vast, unfamiliar landmasses. The supercontinent of Pangaea has not yet formed. That collision is still over 100 million years in the future. Instead, the globe is dominated by the immense southern supercontinent of Gondwana, which includes the future South America, Africa, Antarctica, Australia and India, all locked together near the South Pole. Further north, scattered across the warmer tropical latitudes, lie the continents of Laurentia, the ancient core of North America, Baltica, Northern Europe, and Siberia, all separated by wide, ancient and now vanished oceans, like the Iapetus Ocean, which was slowly closing, preparing to stitch these northern lands together. The climate of the Silurian was, for the most part, warmer and more stable than the preceding Ordovician period, which had ended in a severe ice age. The vast ice caps on Gondwana had melted, returning immense volumes of water to the oceans. As a result, sea levels were exceptionally high, perhaps among the highest in Earth's history. Imagine what this means. The continents, with their generally low-lying interiors, were extensively flooded. Vast, shallow, warm epicontinental seas stretched deep into the hearts of Laurentia and Baltica. These were not the deep, cold, blue oceans of today. They were immense, tranquil, perhaps somewhat murky, shallow water environments stretching for thousands of kilometers. This was the stage upon which the drama of the sea scorpions would unfold. And what of the land? To a modern visitor, the land would be the strangest sight of all. It was, for the most part, empty, barren. The great forests of ferns and conifers that would define later ages had not yet evolved. There were no trees, no shrubs, no flowers, no grasses. The land was a world of stark, eroded rock, gravel plains, and perhaps vast stretches of sun-baked mud. Life, however, was just beginning its first, tentative invasion of this empty realm. Near the damp margins of these shallow seas, in river estuaries, or perhaps in boggy lowlands, the very first, most primitive vascular plants were taking root. Creatures like Cooksonia, tiny, leafless, branching green stems only a few centimeters high, perhaps formed the first, faint green fuzz on the edges of the continents. Small millipedes and other primitive arthropods may have followed, venturing out of the water to nibble on this earliest, simplest vegetation. But the action of life, the great theatre of evolution, was not on land. The land was a silent, empty stage. The entire complex, vibrant drama of life was concentrated in the seas. And these seas were teeming. The great extinctions of the Ordovician period had passed, and life was rediversifying with astonishing creativity. Vast, intricate reefs were beginning to form, built not by modern corals, but by strange, extinct sponges called stromatoporoids and ancient honeycomb-like tabulate and rugose corals. The seafloor was carpeted, as we've noted, with brachiopods, lamp shells, and the beautiful, filter-feeding crinoids, sea lilies, their feathery arms swaying in the gentle currents. Trilobites, those iconic armored arthropods, scuttled across the mud in myriad forms. And the vertebrates, our own distant lineage, were present, but still finding their footing. The dominant fish of the Silurian were the ostracoderms, the jawless fish. Imagine creatures armored in heavy, bony plates, perhaps resembling flattened swimming shields, vacuuming detritus from the seafloor. The great evolutionary innovation of jaws was just beginning to appear, with the very first primitive jawed fish, acanthodians or spiny sharks, emerging as small, agile swimmers. The age of Dunkleosteus was still in the future. The great vertebrate predators had not yet truly risen. This was the world, an ocean-dominated planet, warm, shallow, and ruled by invertebrates. The largest creatures in the sea were not fish, but the giant, straight-shelled orthocones, those buoyant cephalopod predators. And rising to challenge them, diversifying in the warm shallows, perfectly adapted to hunt the abundant trilobites and jawless fish, was the group that would come to define the apex of predatory power in this ancient realm, the Eurypterids. This warm, shallow, invertebrate-dominated sea was their perfect kingdom, the ideal environment that allowed them to grow large, to diversify, and to become, for a time, the undisputed armored masters of the Silurian oceans. Let us begin our exploration of these creatures by first understanding what exactly they were. We call them sea scorpions, a name that immediately conjures images of the familiar venomous land-dwelling arachnids of today, simply transplanted into an ancient ocean. It is a powerful evocative name, and indeed some Eurypterid species, with their segmented bodies and long spike-like tails, bear a striking superficial resemblance to the scorpions we know. But this name, while memorable and convenient, is a biological illusion, a misnomer born from early comparisons, just as mammoth is not an elephant and Megalania was not truly a dragon. The Eurypterids were not true scorpions. They did not possess the venomous stinger that defines their terrestrial namesakes. They were a distinct parallel lineage of arthropods that followed their own unique evolutionary path, one that diverged from the ancestors of true scorpions hundreds of millions of years ago. They were something far more ancient, a dynasty that rose, reigned, and vanished from the earth long before the first large vertebrates ever walked on land. To understand what they were, we must look at the great sprawling family tree of animal life. Eurypterids belong to the phylum Arthropoda, the vast and incredibly successful group of jointed-legged animals that in the modern world includes insects, crustaceans like crabs and shrimp, and arachnid spiders, mites, and true scorpions. They were, without a doubt, arthropods, defined by their hard external skeleton, their armor, and their numerous jointed limbs. But they belonged to a very specific and ancient subgroup within the arthropods known as the Chelicerata. This is the crucial distinction. The chelicerates are named for their very first pair of appendages, the chelicerae, which are specialized pincer-like or fang-like mouthparts located right at the front of the head, used for grasping, tearing, or processing food. This lineage includes all the arachnids we know today: the spiders, the true scorpions, the harvestmen, the ticks, the mites. So the Eurypterids were relatives of modern scorpions, in the same way that a human is a relative of a lemur, sharing a distant common ancestor, but long separated by evolutionary time and adapted to vastly different lives. Their closest living relatives, however, are perhaps even more ancient and strange: the Cephalosaurians, the creatures we know as horseshoe crabs. These living fossils, which still crawl through shallow coastal waters today, their armored bodies seemingly unchanged for over 400 million years, are the last survivors of a once vast group of aquatic chelicerates. When we look at a horseshoe crab with its rounded, shield-like carapace, its segmented abdomen, and its long, stiff tail spike, we are perhaps glimpsing the closest living body plan, the most similar anatomical echo to the creatures that dominated the Silurian seas. Eurypterids and horseshoe crabs were cousins, both part of this ancient aquatic radiation of chelicerates. So, a Eurypterid was an aquatic chelicerate arthropod. But what defined them as a group? Their bodies followed a distinct two-part plan. The front section, the prosoma, or cephalothorax, was a fused head and chest region, covered by a single, solid, often shield-like piece of armor called the carapace. This carapace housed the brain, the stomach, and the attachments for their 6 pairs of jointed limbs. Following this was the opisthosoma, or abdomen. This was the long, flexible part of the body, composed of 12 distinct articulating segments that allowed the creature to swim, turn, and perhaps flex its tail. This abdomen tapered gradually, eventually ending in that final, distinctive, spike-like appendage, the telson, the feature that earned them the scorpion name. This was the basic blueprint: an armored head, a segmented, tapering body, 6 pairs of limbs, and a tail spike. But upon this simple, ancient framework, evolution in the warm, shallow, and competitive seas of the Paleozoic unleashed an astonishing burst of creativity. It modified these parts, shaping the limbs into paddles, claws, or walking legs, armoring the body and scaling the entire creature up to sizes that seem almost impossible for an arthropod. To understand these armored masters, we must next look closer at their anatomical toolkit, piece by armored piece. To truly understand the Eurypterid, we must first understand its armor. Like all arthropods, the sea scorpions lacked an internal skeleton. Their body was supported and, just as importantly, protected by a hard external skeleton or exoskeleton, made of a tough, lightweight and resilient material called chitin, likely reinforced with mineralized proteins, making it rigid and durable. This armor was not just a passive shield, it was the scaffold for their muscles, the framework for their limbs, and the very structure that defined their form and movement. It was, in essence, their body. Let us look closely at this armor, this elegant, jointed suit of natural plate mail. As we noted, the Eurypterid body was divided into 2 main sections, the prosoma, or head shield, and the opisthosoma, or abdomen. The prosoma, the front section, was covered by a single, solid, unjointed piece of armor called the carapace. Imagine this piece. Its shape varied wonderfully between different species. In some, like the common Eurypterus, it was a relatively small, squared-off or semicircular shield covering the head. In others, like the giant Pterygotus, it could be broad and flattened. This single piece of armor served as the creature's helmet, protecting the delicate underlying organs, the brain, the simple stomach, and the vital nerve centers. It was a single, strong, load-bearing structure, providing a solid anchor for the powerful muscles of the limbs and the grasping chelicerae. Embedded within this carapace, as we shall see, were the eyes, the creature's windows onto its ancient world. But the carapace itself was the command center, the armored cockpit from which the rest of the segmented, flexible body extended. Following this solid head shield was the long segmented body, or opisthosoma. This section, which formed the bulk of the creature's length, was a masterpiece of articulated engineering, demonstrating the fundamental arthropod blueprint, strength combined with flexibility. It was divided into 12 distinct segments, each encased in its own ring or plate of armor, tergites on top, sternites on the bottom. Imagine these segments one after another, like overlapping plates. Each segment was connected to the next by a thin, flexible, unhardened membrane of cuticle. This jointed construction allowed the Eurypterid a remarkable range of motion, at least in the vertical and side-to-side directions. It could flex its long body, arch its back, or swish its tail from side to side, movements essential for swimming, steering, or perhaps righting itself if overturned. This long abdomen was itself often subdivided. The first 6 segments, immediately following the head, were typically broad and somewhat flattened, forming the pre-abdomen. Tucked underneath these segments, protected by plates, were the delicate flap-like appendages that housed the creature's gills. These gill tracts, resembling a series of overlapping leaves in a book, were how the Eurypterid breathed, extracting the vital dissolved oxygen from the Silurian water. This placement underneath the body protected the vital respiratory organs from damage and silt. The final 6 segments formed the post-abdomen, or the tail. This section was typically narrower, more cylindrical or flattened, lacking the gill appendages underneath. It was a simpler, more muscular part of the body, providing the propulsive force for swimming in some species, or perhaps acting as a flexible stalk in others. This was the part of the creature that truly evoked the scorpion image, tapering elegantly towards its final terminal piece. This entire articulated suit of armor, from the head shield to the final segment, was not just a defensive shell. It was a dynamic, functional structure. It was lightweight enough to allow for active swimming in many species, yet strong enough to provide significant protection against the predators of its time. Perhaps the giant orthocones, or the newly evolving jawed fishes, or, very likely, other larger Eurypterids. We must also imagine the sensory input from this armor. It was likely not a numb, insensate shell. Like modern arthropods, the exoskeleton was probably perforated by countless microscopic pores and sensory bristles, setae, connecting the creature's nervous system to the outside world. Imagine it feeling the subtle changes in water pressure, the currents flowing over its body, the vibrations of prey moving through the mud nearby. The armor itself was an immense, complex sensory organ, allowing the Eurypterid to touch and feel its surrounding environment in a way we, as soft-bodied vertebrates, can scarcely imagine. To contemplate the Eurypterid's body is to appreciate the elegance and efficiency of the arthropod design. It was a perfect fusion of armor and agility, a segmented, jointed and sensitive shell that allowed these creatures to move, to breathe, to hunt and to thrive, becoming the armored masters of their lost Paleozoic world. Embedded within that solid protective head shield, the carapace, were the Eurypterid's primary sensory organs for sight, their eyes. And like so many aspects of their anatomy, their eyes were a fascinating combination of the familiar and the utterly alien, hinting at a visual world profoundly different from our own. They possessed not just one pair of eyes, but two distinct types, each likely serving a different purpose in navigating and surviving the shallow, perhaps murky, Silurian seas. First, and most prominent, were the large, complex, compound eyes. These were positioned on the top, or sometimes more towards the sides, of the carapace. Imagine the eyes of a modern dragonfly or a housefly, but scaled up and mounted on an armored aquatic predator. Each compound eye was not a single lens like our own, but a sophisticated array of hundreds, perhaps even thousands, of tiny individual hexagonal lenses packed tightly together, each one pointing in a slightly different direction. This optical system produced a vastly different kind of vision than ours. It was likely not a single, high-resolution, sharply focused image. Instead, it was a mosaic, a pixelated tapestry of countless small images combined by the creature's brain into a wide, encompassing field of view. What are the advantages of such an eye? The primary one is an exceptional sensitivity to movement. Any small shift in the environment, the flicker of a trilobite's leg, the shadow of a passing orthocone, the sudden dart of a primitive fish, would trigger a cascade of signals across the array of lenses. This made the compound eye an incredibly effective motion detector, perfect for an ambush predator lying in wait, or for a potential prey item needing to react instantly to an approaching threat. The placement of these large eyes on top of the carapace is also telling. In many species, particularly the larger ones like Pterygotus, the eyes were positioned high and wide, providing an almost panoramic view of the surroundings. For a creature that perhaps spent much of its time lying partially buried in the mud or sand of the seafloor, this was the perfect arrangement. It could lie concealed, its armored body hidden, with only those large stalked or raised compound eyes protruding, scanning the water above and around it like the periscopes of a submarine, watching patiently for the silhouette of prey passing overhead or the approaching shadow of a larger predator. But this was not their only visual system. In addition to the large compound eyes, most Eurypterids also possessed a second, much smaller pair of eyes, located centrally on the carapace, often nestled close together on a small, raised bump. These were the ocelli, or simple eyes. Imagine two tiny bead-like lenses, perhaps appearing as dark, glossy spots on the top of the head shield. Unlike the complex, image-forming compound eyes, these ocelli were far simpler structures, perhaps containing only a single lens each, not designed for seeing sharp details or complex shapes. What was their function? In modern arthropods that possess them, ocelli are not used for seeing in the way we understand. Instead, they are highly sensitive light meters. They are adept at detecting subtle, rapid changes in light intensity, the difference between bright sunlight and a passing shadow, the shift from day to twilight, or perhaps even the polarized light patterns in the water, which could be used for navigation. For a Eurypterid, these simple ocelli would have been crucial for orienting itself. A creature resting on the seabed, even if buried, could use its ocelli to sense the direction of the sun, maintaining its bearings. Perhaps they acted as a horizon detector, helping the animal maintain its stability and orientation while swimming through the water column with its paddle-like limbs. They might also have served as a vital early warning system. The sudden, sharp decrease in light intensity caused by a large predator, like a giant orthocone, passing overhead would be instantly registered by the ocelli, perhaps triggering a defensive reflex or an escape maneuver even before the compound eyes had fully resolved the image of the threat. So, the Eurypterid perceived its world through a dual visual system. The large, pixelated mosaic of the compound eyes, building a wide-angle map of movement and form, and the small, simple ocelli, constantly monitoring the ambient light, sensing shadows, and providing a fundamental sense of up and down. It was a visual world tuned for survival in the Paleozoic oceans. A world perhaps not of sharp, vivid, colorful detail as we know it, but a world of perceived motion, of shifting light and shadow, of sudden flickers in the peripheral vision. It was the perfect sensory toolkit for a creature that lived a life of patient ambush, of watchful stillness punctuated by bursts of sudden, predatory action, navigating the silty, sun-dappled and dangerous waters of its ancient forgotten kingdom. The eyes, mounted high on their armored throne, were the silent, ever-watchful sentinels of the Silurian deep. The Eurypterid perceived its world through those high-set compound eyes, a mosaic of light and shadow, finely tuned to the slightest flicker of movement. Once prey was detected, a trilobite stirring in the mud, a primitive, jawless fish gliding past, the creature would deploy the formidable tools located at the very front of its body. These were its chelicerae, the first pair of appendages, and they are the very feature that defines the Eurypterid as a chelicerate, a relative of spiders and scorpions. We must understand that these creatures did not possess jaws in the vertebrate sense, like the bone-crushing blades of Dunkleosteus. Their mouth was a simple opening on the underside of their head shield, designed primarily for ingestion. The real work of capturing, dispatching and manipulating food was done by these specialized external limbs. And across the vast diversity of the Eurypterid family, these chelicerae evolved into a remarkable array of different tools, perfectly suited to different predatory lifestyles. In many of the common, perhaps more generalist forms, like the abundant Eurypterus, the chelicerae were relatively small and simple. Picture them as a pair of short, pincer-like appendages located just in front of the mouth. They were perhaps not weapons of overwhelming power, but delicate, precise tools used perhaps for scavenging on carcasses, tearing apart soft-bodied prey, or manipulating small invertebrates found in the sediment. For these creatures, the chelicerae were more like feeding forks than hunting spears. But in other lineages, particularly the giant predators of the group, evolution forged these simple pincers into truly terrifying, specialized weapons. Consider the Pterygotids, the family that includes the giants Pterygotus and Jaekelopterus. In these creatures, the chelicerae were not small or simple at all. They were enormously elongated, multi-jointed arms extending far forward from the creature's head. and they terminated not in simple pincers, but in large, powerful, and cruelly toothed claws, or chelae. Imagine a pair of long, jointed grappling hooks lined with sharp, interlocking spines and fangs, capable of being extended and retracted with precision. These were not tools for delicate scavenging. These were weapons of ambush and capture. The high-set, compound eyes of Pterygotus would scan the water. When a fish or a smaller Eurypterid swam into range, these immense waiting claws would lash out with terrifying speed, the toothed pincers snapping shut, impaling the prey. The long reach of these arms meant the predator could strike from a short distance, snatching its victim and drawing it back towards the waiting mouth, all while the main body remained partially concealed or stable. And still, other Eurypterids evolved yet another strategy, one perhaps even more alien. In forms like Mixopterus or the aptly named Megalograptus, great writing for its fossil tracks, it was not just the Chelicerae, but the next few pairs of walking limbs that were heavily modified. These front limbs were covered in immensely long, stiff, interlocking spines. When held together, they formed a dense, cage-like basket beneath the creature's head. This was not a grasping tool, but a trapping one. Picture this creature crawling slowly across the muddy seafloor, or perhaps half buried within it. It uses this spiny basket of limbs to sweep through the soft sediment like a living net, filtering out small invertebrates, trilobites, or worms. Or perhaps it simply lay in wait, and when a creature swam too close, it would snap this basket of spines shut, entrapping its prey in a cage from which there was no escape. Once the prey was captured, whether by the great claws of Pterygotus or the spiny basket of Mixopterus, the process was likely the same. The food was brought beneath the carapace to the mouth. There, the bases of the walking legs, hard, knobby structures called gnathobases, would move against each other, grinding and shredding the food into smaller, manageable pieces before it was pushed into the simple mouth opening. The Eurypterid's jaws were, in effect, its legs. This incredible diversity of feeding appendages, from simple pincers to giant toothed claws to complex trapping baskets, showcases the evolutionary creativity of the Eurypterids. They were not a monolithic group of identical scorpions. They were a complex dynasty of predators, adapting their primary weapons to exploit every available niche in the Paleozoic oceans. The Chelicerae, in all their varied forms, were the sharp, deadly business end of these armored masters. We have seen the Eurypterid as a creature of perception, its stalked eyes scanning the ancient seabed, and as a creature of predation, its formidable chelicerae and spiny limbs ready to trap or seize its prey. But many Eurypterids were not just static, bottom-dwelling lurkers. They were active, graceful, and perhaps even swift inhabitants of the water column. And they achieved this mastery of the sea through one of the most elegant and defining adaptations of their lineage: the modification of their final pair of legs into broad, powerful swimming paddles. Imagine the typical arthropod blueprint, a series of paired, jointed legs used primarily for walking or scuttling along the ground. The Eurypterid possessed 6 such pairs attached to its head shield, the prosoma. The first pair, as we saw, were the Chelicerae, the feeding appendages. The next 4 pairs were typically walking legs or ambulatory limbs. Picture these legs. They were often stout, jointed, perhaps ending in simple points or small pincers. In many species, they might have been relatively small, perhaps used for maneuvering slowly on the seafloor, for pushing through mud, or for anchoring the creature in a current as it lay in wait. In some of the giant forms, these legs were robust, used to haul their immense armored bodies across the bottoms of rivers or estuaries. But it was the 6th and final pair of limbs that truly set the most successful and iconic Eurypterid families apart. In lineages like the Pterygotids, the family of giants, and the Eurypterids themselves, like the common Eurypterus, this last pair of legs underwent a profound transformation. They became oar-like, evolving into broad, flattened paddles, perfectly suited for propulsion through water. Let us look closely at this evolutionary marvel. The final segments of the limb, which in a walking leg might have formed a simple foot or claw, became elongated, expanded, and flattened. The edges were often fringed with stiff bristles, further increasing the surface area, much like the feathers on a bird's wing or the design of a specialized canoe paddle. The joint connecting this paddle to the body was likely highly mobile, allowing for a complex, perhaps figure-8 or sculling motion. This was a creature that had evolved its own built-in set of oars attached to the rear of its head region. How did it use them? Imagine a Eurypterus or a Pterygotus deciding to move. It could push off the bottom with its walking legs, but once in the water column, these paddles became the primary engine. Beating in a rhythmic, coordinated fashion, perhaps in unison or in alternating strokes, these broad surfaces would push against the water, driving the streamlined, segmented body forward with surprising grace and perhaps considerable speed. This adaptation was a revolutionary leap. It liberated the Eurypterids from being solely bottom-bound crawlers, like their horseshoe crab cousins or the trilobites they hunted. It allowed them to become active pelagic predators, capable of chasing prey through the open water, of migrating long distances between feeding grounds, or of swiftly evading larger predators like the giant orthocones. Picture the movement: a Pterygotus, its giant body hanging suspended, its formidable claws held ready at the front. With slow, powerful, almost languid beats of its two large swimming paddles, it glides through the Silurian Sea, a silent, armored torpedo. Its long, flexible tail, the opisthosoma, likely aided in this movement, perhaps undulating gently to provide additional thrust, or flexing to act as a rudder, steering the creature left or right. This ability to swim, and perhaps swim well, opened up a three-dimensional world of ecological opportunity. It allowed them to hunt the newly evolving jawless fish in the open water. It allowed them to spread globally, colonizing the vast, shallow epicontinental seas that covered the ancient continents. It was, without a doubt, a key factor in their long and spectacular evolutionary success. But not all Eurypterids possessed these paddles. Some, like the strange, spiny-legged Mixopterus or the giant Hibbertopterus from the Carboniferous, had walking legs all the way back, suggesting a lifestyle firmly rooted to the seafloor. They were the walkers and the waders, while their paddle-bearing cousins were the swimmers and the gliders. This simple, elegant modification, the transformation of a walking leg into a swimming oar, is a perfect example of evolutionary opportunism, of nature repurposing an existing structure for an entirely new and revolutionary function. These paddles were the engines that powered the armored masters of the Paleozoic seas, allowing them to not just crawl, but to truly swarm and to rule the ancient waters. We have assembled the image of the Eurypterid, the armored head shield with its complex eyes, the formidable grasping claws, the segmented, flexible body, and the powerful swimming paddles. But our picture is incomplete without the final, iconic, and deeply mysterious appendage that terminates the body, the telson. This is the feature that, more than any other, earned the Eurypterids their common name, sea scorpions. In many species, particularly those in the suborder Eurypterina, which includes the common Eurypterus, this final segment is elongated, hardened, and sharpened into a formidable spike, almost identical in form to the stinger or aculeus of a modern terrestrial scorpion. It is a deeply evocative image, one that immediately suggests a venomous, deadly purpose. Imagine one of these creatures, perhaps a Eurypterus or a Pterygotus, arching its flexible, segmented tail over its back to deliver a swift, poison-laden strike to its prey, or to defend itself against a larger predator. This vision of a giant, swimming, stinging scorpion has haunted our popular imagination for over a century. But is it true? Was the Paleozoic ocean truly filled with creatures wielding giant, venomous stingers? The evidence, upon quieter, more careful examination, suggests a different and perhaps less dramatic truth. Despite the tantalizing shape, paleontologists have found no definitive evidence, such as a preserved venom gland or a clear delivery channel within the telson, to suggest that it was a venomous stinger. While such soft tissues rarely preserve, the absence of even a hypothetical duct or internal structure combined with the anatomy of the appendage itself makes the stinger hypothesis unlikely for most, if not all, Eurypterid species. In many of the giant forms, like Pterygotus or Jaekelopterus, the telson was not even a sharp, narrow spike. It was broad, flattened, and somewhat spade-shaped or paddle-like. This structure bears no resemblance to a stinger at all. Its function in these large, swimming predators was almost certainly hydrodynamic. It likely acted as a large passive rudder, or perhaps an active caudal fin, helping to stabilize the creature's long body as it swam, or providing steering and perhaps even a degree of propulsion in concert with the swimming paddles. It was the tail fin of a living torpedo, not the weapon of an assassin. But what about the truly spike-like telsons of creatures like Eurypterus? If not for stinging, what was their purpose? Several more plausible, though less theatrical, hypotheses exist. It may have been primarily a defensive weapon, but a physical one, not a chemical one. A sharp, rigid spike, perhaps wielded by the flexible tail, could still be a formidable deterrent. Imagine a Eurypterid, when threatened, flexing its abdomen, pointing this spike towards an attacker, a clear "do not touch" signal. It could potentially inflict a painful puncture wound on a soft-bodied predator, or perhaps jam itself into the mouth of a larger creature attempting to swallow it. Alternatively, the telson may have served as a tool for stabilization or navigation while walking on the sea floor, much like the long, stiff tail spike, also called a telson, of their living relatives, the horseshoe crabs. Imagine a Eurypterus scuttling across the soft mud of the Silurian seabed. If it were to be accidentally flipped over by a current or a predator, it could perhaps use its long, spike-like telson, bracing it against the sediment, to help lever its armored body and right itself, a vital function for a creature so heavily armored on its back. Or perhaps it was simply the hydrodynamic counterpoint to the head, a necessary, streamlined termination for an active swimming body, its sharp point merely the most efficient shape for reducing drag as it moved through the water. In some forms, like the bizarre spiny Mixopterus, the telson was long and sharply curved, almost forming a hook. What this was for remains a mystery. Perhaps it was used in mating, for grasping a partner, or in some unknown defensive or feeding posture. The sea scorpion name, therefore, is likely a beautiful illusion, a case of convergent evolution stumbling upon a similar shape for a completely different purpose. The telson was not a stinger. It was a rudder, a balancing tool, a defensive spike, a hydrodynamic stabilizer, or perhaps a combination of all these things, varying in its primary function from species to species. To contemplate the telson is to engage in the quiet, detective work of paleontology, to look past the obvious, evocative resemblance and question the true function of these ancient alien structures. It is a reminder that nature often repeats shapes, but rarely repeats the exact story. The tail of the sea scorpion, sharp and menacing, was likely a tool of balance and navigation, not of venom, guiding the armored creature silently, gracefully, through its lost aquatic world. We have now assembled our Eurypterid piece by piece. We have seen its compound eyes, its grasping claws, its segmented body, its swimming paddles, and its mysterious tail spike. We have built the blueprint for this ancient creature. But our journey tonight is about giant sea scorpions. And while the common Eurypterus was perhaps only the size of a human hand or forearm, this blueprint, this basic design, proved to be incredibly scalable. Evolution took this armored, jointed, paddle-swimming form and, under a unique set of circumstances, expanded it to truly terrifying proportions. Let us now turn our gaze to this phenomenon. Let us explore how these creatures entered the arena of the giants. Why, in these ancient Paleozoic seas, did an arthropod, a relative of spiders and crabs, grow to the size of a crocodile or even larger, claiming the throne of apex predator, a role held today almost exclusively by large vertebrates? The rise of the giant Eurypterids, creatures reaching lengths of 2 meters or more, is one of the great, awe-inspiring stories of the Paleozoic. It was not a given. It was the result of a perfect storm, a unique confluence of evolutionary opportunity and environmental conditions that opened a window in time for arthropod gigantism in the water. The first, and perhaps most crucial, factor was opportunity. The ecological stage was empty. Imagine the Silurian seas, 430 million years ago. Life was diverse, yes, but the hierarchy was different. The role of the large, fast-moving, intelligent apex predator was vacant. Our own lineage, the vertebrates, was still in its infancy. The dominant fish of the day were the ostracoderms, the jawless, armored bottom feeders, slow and heavily protected. The first jawed fish were just appearing, but they were small, perhaps the size of minnows or trout. The great bone-crushing placoderms like Jaekelopterus were still tens of millions of years in the future. The oceans lacked a dominant, large, swimming vertebrate hunter. The only other major predators were invertebrates, the giant straight-shelled orthocones, those buoyant cephalopods. But these giants, while formidable, were perhaps slow, deliberate hunters, their jet propulsion system less agile than the sculling paddles of a Eurypterid. Into this world, where the large predator niche was essentially unfilled, the Eurypterids, with their efficient swimming, protective armor, and advanced compound eyes, faced an open evolutionary pathway. There was no established vertebrate king to keep them in check. The throne was empty, and the Eurypterids were perfectly poised to seize it. They simply grew, generation after generation, to fill the available space at the top of the food web. The second factor may have been a familiar one, a driver of gigantism we have seen in other arthropods like Arthropleura: oxygen. The Paleozoic atmosphere, including the Silurian and Devonian periods, experienced significant fluctuations in oxygen levels, but generally maintained concentrations as high, or perhaps even significantly higher than today. For an aquatic, gill-breathing creature like a Eurypterid, this is critical. Higher atmospheric oxygen levels mean more oxygen dissolves into the surface waters of the ocean. Gills, the organs for extracting that dissolved oxygen, become more efficient in this richer environment. A more efficient respiratory system can more effectively power a larger body. The physical metabolic constraints that might normally limit the size of a gill-breathing arthropod were relaxed, or perhaps lifted entirely, by this oxygen-rich water. The environment provided the fuel necessary to power a giant armored body. Finally, there was the inexorable logic of the evolutionary arms race. As Eurypterids began to grow larger, they were able to hunt larger prey. They began to target the increasingly common jawless fish, and perhaps even the early jawed fish. In response, these fish evolved better defenses, thicker, heavier armor, or perhaps greater speed. This, in turn, created selective pressure for even larger Eurypterids, with stronger claws capable of overcoming these defenses. This silent arms race, played out over millions of years between hunter and hunted, would have constantly pushed the upper limits of size. A larger predator could eat a wider range of prey and was less vulnerable to other predators, including perhaps cannibalism from other Eurypterids. This combination, this perfect confluence of factors, created the window. The empty ecological niche of the apex predator, the oxygen-rich environment providing the metabolic means, and the escalating arms race providing the evolutionary motive, all came together in the Silurian and Devonian. It was a unique, fleeting period in Earth's history when the rules were different. It was a time when an arthropod, a sea scorpion, could evolve to become the undisputed 8-foot-long king of the seas. Let us now meet the first of these giants by name. The conditions were perfect. The Silurian and early Devonian seas, warm, shallow, and lacking dominant vertebrate predators, provided the ideal stage for the Eurypterid dynasty to reach its colossal zenith. And walking, or rather swimming onto this stage, was one of the most famous, most formidable, and most widespread of all the giant sea scorpions, Pterygotus. The name means winged one, a reference not to flight but to its large, wing-like swimming paddles, the powerful engines that propelled this hunter through its aquatic world. And this creature was a hunter on a truly impressive scale. Let us try to picture Pterygotus now, perhaps gliding silently through the shallow, sun-dappled waters of a Silurian estuary roughly 420 million years ago. It is a creature of imposing size. While many Eurypterids were small, Pterygotus was a giant, with the largest species, like Pterygotus grandidens, reaching estimated lengths of over 2 meters, nearly 7 feet. Imagine an arthropod, a relative of spiders and horseshoe crabs, as long as a tall human, heavily armored and built for predation. Its body is relatively flattened and streamlined, far more so than the common scuttling Eurypterus. This was not primarily a bottom dweller. This was a creature adapted for active swimming in the water column. Its head shield or carapace is broad and semicircular, dominated by the 2 large crescent-shaped compound eyes, positioned wide apart, perhaps granting it excellent vision for targeting prey in the open water. Its tail, the opisthozomer, is long and segmented, but the final piece, the telson, is not the sharp, scorpion-like spike of its smaller relatives. Instead, it is a broad, flattened, paddle-like structure, almost like the tail fin of a lobster or a whale. This telson likely acted as a powerful rudder or stabilizer, helping to steer the creature's immense body and perhaps providing an extra burst of propulsive force with a vertical flex. The primary engines, as its name suggests, were its last pair of limbs, the huge, oar-like swimming paddles. Imagine these powerful appendages beating rhythmically, driving the creature's streamlined 7-foot body through the water with a quiet, efficient, perhaps almost graceful power. But the true business end of Pterygotus was at the front. Extending far forward from its head were its chelicerae, those first appendages. In Pterygotus, these were not the small, simple pincers of Eurypterus. They were enormously elongated, multi-jointed arms, terminating in large, powerful, and cruelly toothed claws, or chelae. Imagine a pair of long, jointed grappling hooks lined with sharp, interlocking spines and fangs, capable of being extended and retracted with precision. Pterygotus was an apex predator, the lion or the great white shark of the Silurian seas. What did it hunt? Its size, speed, and formidable weaponry meant it could tackle a wide variety of prey. It undoubtedly hunted the abundant, armored, jawless fish of the time, its powerful claws perhaps capable of crushing or puncturing their bony shields. It likely preyed upon the newly evolving, smaller-jawed fish. It would have made short work of trilobites, smaller Eurypterids, cannibalism was likely common, and even the large, shelled orthocone cephalopods, perhaps snatching them from the water column or grappling with them in a strange battle of arthropod versus mollusk. Imagine its hunting strategy. Perhaps it was an ambush predator, using its flattened body to lie partially concealed on the seabed, its giant eyes watching the water above, its claws folded back, ready. When a fish or other prey item swam within range, it would explode upwards, those long arms shooting out, the toothed claws snapping shut with lethal precision. Or perhaps it was a more active pursuit hunter, its powerful paddles driving it through the water in a chase, its large compound eyes tracking the frantic movements of its prey before the final, grasping strike. Fossils of Pterygotus are found in Silurian and early Devonian marine rocks across the globe, from North America to Europe to Australia, indicating it was a widespread and incredibly successful genus for tens of millions of years. It was a true cosmopolitan ruler of the ancient oceans. To contemplate Pterygotus is to be confronted with the sheer scale and predatory perfection that the arthropod body plan could achieve when given the opportunity. It is to imagine a 7-foot-long, armor-plated creature propelled by powerful oars, its giant crescent-shaped eyes scanning the water, its long, toothed grappling hooks held ready. It was a creature of alien anatomy, yet one that filled a familiar ecological role, the dominant large predator, with terrifying efficiency. A true giant from the age of armored invertebrates, the undisputed king of the Silurian seas. The image of Pterygotus, a 7-foot-long, armor-plated hunter gliding through the Silurian seas, is enough to inspire a profound sense of awe, a glimpse into an age ruled by invertebrate giants. But as spectacular as Pterygotus was, it was not the final, nor even the largest expression of Eurypterid gigantism. Evolution, it seems, had one final, terrifying masterpiece to create in this lineage, a creature that would represent the absolute, undisputed pinnacle of arthropod size for all of known history. To find it, we must move forward slightly in time, leaving the Silurian behind and entering the early Devonian period, roughly 400 million years ago. The world continues to change. The first primitive, leafless forests are perhaps taking root on land, and in the seas the age of fishes is dawning. The first large, jawed placoderms, the armored fish, are beginning to appear, signaling the start of a new vertebrate dynasty that will soon challenge the long reign of the invertebrate predators. But in this brief transitional window, before the vertebrates truly took over, the Eurypterids made their final spectacular stand. And they did so not necessarily in the open ocean, but surprisingly, in freshwater environments, in vast river systems, deltas, and perhaps swampy lakes. And lurking in these freshwater systems, in what is now modern-day Germany, lived Jaekelopterus rhenanii. For a long time, its existence was hinted at only by fragmented fossils, but the discovery that revealed its true mind-bending scale was not a complete body, but a single, isolated piece of one of its chelicerae, its grasping claws. This fossilized claw, or chelar, measured a staggering 46 centimeters or over 18 inches in length. Just the claw. From this single immense fragment, paleontologists, by carefully extrapolating the proportions based on its smaller, more complete relatives, were able to estimate the creature's total body size. The number they arrived at is almost unbelievable. Jaekelopterus was estimated to be 2.5 meters, roughly 8.2 feet, long. Let us pause and try to comprehend that scale. This is an arthropod, a sea scorpion, as long as a small car, longer than a king-size bed, taller if it were to stand on its tail than the tallest human being who has ever lived. It is, by a significant margin, the largest arthropod known to science, dwarfing even the giant Arthropleura that walked the land in the later Carboniferous. Imagine this creature now, not in the vast open ocean, but perhaps resting, camouflaged, on the bottom of a wide, murky Devonian river, its armored, segmented body partially obscured by silt. It is the color of the mud, its immense form almost invisible. Only its stalked compound eyes, perched high on its carapace, swivel slowly, scanning the water above. Its body is likely flattened, similar to Pterygotus, adapted for stability in the current. Its swimming paddles, at the rear of its head shield, are immense, capable of propelling its colossal 2.5-meter body through the water, perhaps in a sudden, terrifying burst of speed to ambush its prey. And that prey? What did this freshwater leviathan hunt? In the river systems of the early Devonian, it was the undisputed apex predator. It likely feared nothing. It would have preyed upon the abundant, armored, jawless fish, its giant, toothed claws capable of puncturing or perhaps even crushing their bony shields. It would have hunted the early acanthodians, spiny sharks, and the first primitive bony fish that shared its waters. It would have certainly cannibalized smaller Eurypterids. And, perhaps most fascinatingly, it may have even hunted the very first of our own distant ancestors to venture into freshwater, or even tentatively onto land. The early lobe-finned fishes and the first primitive tetrapods, the four-legged vertebrates. Imagine the sheer power of that 18-inch claw lashing out from the murky depths, its toothed pincers snapping shut. There was no defense. Jaekelopterus was the Tyrannosaurus rex of the Devonian rivers, an invertebrate king ruling at the very dawn of the vertebrate age. Its existence in freshwater environments is itself a puzzle. Why did the very largest Eurypterids move out of the oceans? Perhaps the open seas were becoming too dangerous with the rise of the first large placoderms and sharks. Perhaps the freshwater rivers and lakes offered a new, untapped larder, rich in fish and lacking in large predators, until Jaekelopterus itself evolved to fill that niche. Jaekelopterus represents the final magnificent flourish of Eurypterid gigantism. It was the last and greatest of the arthropod rulers before the vertebrate dynasty, the age of fishes, truly took hold and seized the crown of apex predator in all the world's waters, a crown they have never relinquished. To contemplate Jaekelopterus is to stand in awe of the sheer, alien scale that life can achieve under the right evolutionary circumstances. It is to picture an 8-foot-long armored scorpion, a creature of chitin and jointed limbs, gliding silently through a lost river, the ultimate expression of invertebrate power, a true and terrifying giant from a world almost too strange to believe. The existence of these giants, Pterygotus gliding through the Silurian seas, Jaekelopterus patrolling the Devonian rivers, was not just an evolutionary curiosity, a simple feat of size. Their immense scale, combined with their sophisticated sensory systems, protective armor, and formidable weaponry, placed them unequivocally at the very top of the food web. For millions of years in the shallow aquatic ecosystems of the Paleozoic, these giant Eurypterids held the ecological rank of apex predator, a position of dominance that shaped the very evolution of life in the waters beneath them. They were, in a very real sense, the kings of their oceans, the Tyrannosaurus rex equivalents of their time. Imagine the world they ruled, a world teeming with other, smaller forms of life, many of them heavily armored, a testament to the intense predatory pressure exerted by these very creatures. The Eurypterids were the driving force in a long-running evolutionary arms race. What did these armored kings hunt? Their diet was likely varied, but their tools were perfectly suited for the most abundant and well-defended prey items of the Paleozoic seas. Consider the trilobites, these iconic armored arthropods, relatives of the Eurypterids themselves, scuttled across the seafloor in countless forms, grazing on detritus or hunting smaller organisms. For a giant Eurypterid, a trilobite with its hard, jointed shell would have been a well-protected but readily available meal. Imagine a Pterygotus gliding silently over the mudflats, its large compound eyes detecting the subtle movement of a trilobite below. The long-toothed chelicerae would lash out, grasping the armored prey, lifting it from the sediment. The trilobite's armor, effective against smaller predators, would offer little defense against the sheer, crushing power of those toothed claws and the grinding, knobby leg bases, gnathobases, beneath the predator's head, which would make short work of the shell to get at the soft tissue within. And what of the other large invertebrates? The great straight-shelled orthocones, those buoyant cephalopod predators, were themselves formidable hunters, but they were likely not safe from the largest Eurypterids. Imagine a confrontation between a 7-foot Pterygotus and a 10-foot orthocone. It would be a slow, strange battle of giants. The cephalopod perhaps using its jet propulsion to maneuver, its tentacles grasping, its sharp beak snapping. The Eurypterid using its powerful swimming paddles to outflank, its long, toothed claws reaching to find a weak point, perhaps near the open end of the orthocone's shell, to grapple and tear at the soft body within. But the Eurypterids truly came into their own as predators of the emerging vertebrates, our own distant ancestors. The Silurian and Devonian seas were filled with the first great radiation of fishes, particularly the ostracoderms, the jawless armored fish. These creatures, like Cephalaspis or Pteraspis, were often slow-moving bottom-dwellers, their heads and bodies encased in thick, bony shields for protection. Against almost any other predator, this armor was a powerful defense, but against the giant Eurypterids, it was simply another challenge to be overcome. The powerful toothed claws of Jaekelopterus or Pterygotus were likely more than capable of puncturing, crushing, or simply gripping these armored fish with inescapable force. The Eurypterids were the original can openers of the Paleozoic seas, specialized in defeating the armor of their prey. They also would have hunted the newly evolving, more agile jawed fish, the small acanthodians, spiny sharks, and early placoderms, their sharp eyes and perhaps surprisingly fast bursts of speed from their swimming paddles allowing them to pursue these swifter, more elusive targets. And finally, like almost all apex predators, they were likely opportunistic, and that included preying on their own kind. The greatest threat to a medium-sized Eurypterid was, in all probability, a larger Eurypterid. Cannibalism was almost certainly a common part of their lifestyle, a grim reality of a food web where the largest creature in the water was the ultimate king, regardless of the prey's lineage. Their reign as apex predators lasted for tens of millions of years. This long period of dominance had a profound effect on the evolutionary trajectory of other marine life. The very rise of heavy armor in trilobites and jawless fish may have been a direct response to the predatory pressure from these giant arthropods. They were the engine of this arms race, the fear that stalked the ancient seas, long before the first great shark or giant placoderm ever swam. To contemplate these creatures as apex predators is to adjust our perspective, to recognize that vertebrate dominance was not a given. It is to imagine a world where the most intelligent, most dangerous, most successful hunters were not fish, but giant, swimming spider cousins. A silent, armored king, gliding through its shallow, murky domain, its giant eyes scanning for the next armored meal. We have established the Eurypterids as the apex predators of their time, their giant armored bodies and formidable claws placing them at the top of the Paleozoic food web. But how did these creatures hunt, and where did these encounters most often take place? The answers to these questions paint a picture that is perhaps quieter, stealthier, and far less oceanic than their common name, sea scorpions, might suggest. Let us first consider the hunt. While some forms with their large swimming paddles and streamlined bodies were clearly capable of active swimming, it is unlikely that even the largest Pterygotus or Jaekelopterus were relentless pursuit predators like a modern tuna or shark. Their bodies, though powerful, were still constrained by the biomechanics of arthropod muscle and jointed exoskeletons. The more probable, and perhaps more terrifying, strategy for many of these giants was one of silent, patient ambush. Imagine again that murky Devonian riverbed, the home of the colossal Jaekelopterus. The water is silty, visibility is low. The giant Eurypterid lies motionless on the bottom, its flattened, mottled armor providing perfect camouflage against the mud and detritus. It is almost invisible, a dormant, armored feature of the river floor, perhaps partially covered by a thin layer of silt. It waits. Its large, stalked compound eyes, perched high on its carapace, are the only part of it that truly moves, swiveling slowly, scanning the water above for the telltale flicker of movement, the shadow of a passing fish. This patient, low-energy strategy would have been incredibly effective. The creature expends almost no calories, simply waiting for its meal to come to it. An unsuspecting armored fish, perhaps a cephalaspis, glides slowly overhead, browsing the sediment. It is completely unaware of the 8-foot armored death trap lurking just below. Then, in a sudden, explosive burst of movement, Jaekelopterus erupts from the mud. It is not a chase, but a swift, vertical strike. The powerful swimming paddles beat once or twice, launching the immense body upwards. Those long, toothed chelicerae, the 18-inch claws, lash out, snapping shut on the victim with inescapable force. The entire brutal encounter is over in seconds. The giant predator then settles back into the silt, its powerful nathobases, leg jaws, beginning the slow work of crushing and consuming its meal. This ambush strategy, a life of stillness and sudden violence, is strongly supported by the top-mounted placement of the eyes in many species. But this brings us to the second and perhaps more surprising part of their story, the where. While we call them sea scorpions, and many early forms like Eurypterus did indeed thrive in shallow, perhaps hypersaline marine lagoons and estuaries, the fossil evidence for the very largest giants, like Jaekelopterus and Pterygotus, increasingly points away from the open ocean. It appears that the very peak of Eurypterid gigantism was achieved not in the vast, competitive seas, but in the brackish, estuarine and fully freshwater environments of the Silurian and Devonian. The colossal Jaekelopterus was found in river delta deposits. Pterygotus fossils are common in rocks that suggest brackish, nearshore environments rather than the deep sea. Why this shift? As the Devonian period, the age of fishes, progressed, the open oceans were becoming increasingly dangerous territory. The first large-jawed placoderms, the bone-armored fish like Dunkleosteus and its relatives, were rising to dominance. Sharks, too, were diversifying and becoming more efficient predators. Perhaps the Eurypterids, for all their armor and size, simply could not compete with these new, faster, more powerful vertebrate hunters in the open water. So they may have found refuge and a new kingdom to rule by moving into the vast, untapped freshwater river systems and deltas. In these environments, the large vertebrate predators were perhaps less common or smaller. The Eurypterids, with their ability to tolerate brackish or fresh water, found themselves once again at the top of the food chain. Here, in the rivers, they were the giants. They were the apex predators. Imagine the quiet terror of a Devonian river. Not just the threat of a large fish, but the constant hidden presence of 8-foot-long armored arthropods lurking in the mud. For the primitive fish, the trilobites that ventured into these waters, and perhaps even the very first of our own four-legged ancestors, the tetrapods, taking their first tentative steps out of the water, these freshwater systems were perhaps the most dangerous places on the planet. This freshwater dominance reframes our entire picture of these creatures. They were not just sea scorpions. They were, at their peak, river leviathans, lake monsters in the most literal sense. This transition into freshwater ecosystems was a highly successful strategy, allowing their dynasty of giants to persist for millions of years, even as the vertebrates were beginning their conquest of the open oceans. It was a quiet, strategic retreat and a new, triumphant reign in a different aquatic realm. The giant Eurypterids, whether lurking in murky rivers or gliding through shallow, brackish seas, did not exist in a vacuum. They were the apex predators, yes, but they were part of a complex and wondrous ecosystem, a world populated by an entirely different cast of creatures than our own. To truly understand the Eurypterids, we must also float for a moment among the other equally strange inhabitants of their Silurian and Devonian world. This was a world ruled by invertebrates, armor, and the very first experiments in vertebrate design. Imagine yourself submerged in that warm, shallow Silurian sea, perhaps just off the coast of the ancient continent of Laurentia. The water is relatively clear, and the seafloor, as we've noted, is a vibrant, living carpet. Vast thickets of crinoids or sea lilies, those delicate filter-feeding relatives of starfish, wave gracefully in the gentle current, their feathery arms held high on long, jointed stalks, resembling a strange underwater garden. Between them, the muddy bottom is paved with the hard, domed shells of brachiopods, countless millions of them, patiently filtering microscopic food from the water. And scuttling across this living carpet, navigating the crinoid stems and brachiopod shells, are the trilobites. These iconic armored arthropods, distant cousins of the Eurypterids themselves, are in their absolute prime of diversity. They come in thousands of shapes and sizes. Small, smooth-shelled forms perhaps burrow in the mud. Larger, spiny trilobites, adorned with elaborate prickles and spines, perhaps a defense against the rising Eurypterid predators, crawl slowly over the rocks. Some, like dalmanites, possess large, sophisticated compound eyes, mounted on stalks, watching the world with the same pixelated gaze as the Eurypterids. These creatures were the abundant, everyday grazers, detritivores, and small-scale predators of the Paleozoic floor, and they were undoubtedly a primary food source for many sea scorpions. Looming over this bustling seafloor, hanging silently in the water column, are the other giants of this age, the giant straight-shelled orthocones. We have met these leviathans before, creatures like Cameroceras, their immense conical shells stretching for 10 feet or more, their buoyancy perfectly controlled. Imagine the quiet tension of this world. The Eurypterid Pterygotus, a 7-foot armored hunter gliding on its paddles, perhaps eyeing a large trilobite below, while itself being watched by the huge, intelligent eye of a 10-foot orthocone hanging motionless just a few meters away. This was a world with two distinct dynasties of invertebrate apex predators, a complex hierarchy of cephalopod and arthropod, a cold war between tentacle and claw. And then there were our own distant relatives, the vertebrates, the fish. In the Silurian, they were not the rulers. They were the underdogs, the heavily armored prey. Picture the ostracoderms, the jawless fish. Creatures like Cephalaspis or Hemicyclaspis, their heads and front bodies encased in thick, solid, bony shields, often in bizarre, flattened or spade-like shapes. They lacked jaws and likely lived as slow-moving bottom feeders, sucking up detritus and microorganisms from the mud. Their armor was their only defense, a direct evolutionary response to the crushing, grasping claws of the Eurypterids. Swimming nervously among them, perhaps with greater agility, were the first acanthodians, or spiny sharks. These small, streamlined fish, among the first creatures to evolve true jaws, were covered in tiny, diamond-shaped scales and possessed fins supported by sharp, rigid spines, another clear defensive innovation. They were fast, perhaps, but small, and would have been easy prey for any medium-sized Eurypterid. As we move into the Devonian, this neighborhood begins to change. The placoderms, the jawed armored fish, begin their spectacular rise, leading to giants like Dunkleosteus. But in the early Devonian, when Jaekelopterus ruled the rivers, these placoderms were perhaps still smaller, or just beginning their journey to gigantism. The dynamic was shifting. The Eurypterids were now facing new, increasingly sophisticated vertebrate competitors, creatures with powerful bites and heavy armor of their own. This was the world of the sea scorpion, a world of crinoid gardens and trilobite plains, a world of giant floating cephalopod cones, a world of slow, armored, jawless fish and small, spiny, newly evolved jawed fish. It was an ecosystem profoundly alien, dominated by armor, shells, and invertebrate predators. The Eurypterids were perfectly adapted to this specific time, this specific cast of characters, their bodies built to hunt, dominate, and thrive in this ancient, forgotten, armored ocean. We have lingered for a time with the giants of the lineage, the colossal apex predators Pterygotus and Jaekelopterus. Their sheer scale is awe-inspiring, defining the upper limits of Eurypterid evolution. But the true success of the Eurypterids, their long 150 million year reign, was not built solely on gigantism. In fact, the giants were the exception. The vast majority of sea scorpions were far smaller, and their story is one not of individual colossal power, but of overwhelming, almost unbelievable abundance. Our title tonight speaks of oceans that were swarmed by these creatures. Let us now turn our focus to this aspect, to the evidence that suggests Eurypterids, at certain times and in certain places, existed in numbers that almost defy imagination. To understand this story of abundance, we must meet the most common, most widespread, and perhaps most famous of all the sea scorpions, Eurypterus. This is the creature that gives the entire order its name, meaning wide wing or broad paddle, referring to its prominent swimming limbs. Unlike the rare, fragmentary remains of the giants, Eurypterus fossils are astonishingly common, particularly in rocks from the late Silurian period, around 420 million years ago. The most famous fossil beds, such as the Bertie Group formations in New York State, have yielded thousands upon thousands of specimens, so many that Eurypterus is, fittingly, the official state fossil of New York. Let us picture this common Eurypterid, the face of the dynasty. It was not a giant. A typical Eurypterus was relatively small, perhaps 15 to 30 centimeters long, the size of a human hand or forearm. It possessed the classic Eurypterid body plan, a squared-off, shield-like carapace bearing the compound and simple eyes. 6 pairs of limbs, with the front pairs perhaps used for walking or manipulating food, and the final pair modified into those characteristic oar-like swimming paddles, and a long 12-segmented abdomen tapering to that final sharp, spike-like telson. It was, in essence, a smaller, perhaps more generalized version of the giant swimmers, a versatile, all-purpose Eurypterid. It could likely swim efficiently in the water column, but its well-developed walking legs suggest it was equally comfortable scuttling across the sea floor. It was likely an opportunistic predator and scavenger, feeding on smaller trilobites, worms, primitive fish, shellfish, and perhaps even its own kind, its small chelicerae well suited for processing a variety of smaller food items. But the most remarkable thing about Eurypterus is not its anatomy, but its sheer numbers. The fossil beds where it is found are not just scattered remains. They are often mass assemblages, dense layers of rock containing hundreds, even thousands of individuals piled one atop the other, a tangled mat of fossilized armor. Imagine a single slab of rock split open by a paleontologist, revealing dozens of complete, perfectly preserved Eurypterus specimens, their bodies overlapping, their paddles and telsons interlocked. These fossil beds are sometimes called bathtub rings, ancient pools or lagoons where these creatures gathered and died in immense concentrations. What event could possibly bring so many of these normally solitary hunters together in one place, creating such a dense and poignant fossil record? These mass assemblages, these swarms frozen in stone, are one of the great puzzles of Eurypterid behavior. They hint at a life that was not just one of isolated predation, but also, at certain crucial moments, one of intense, collective, and perhaps communal activity. The reason for these vast gatherings, however, remains a subject of quiet, scientific contemplation, a mystery that hints at the secret social lives of these ancient, armored creatures. The fossil beds of Eurypterus and other related species present us with this haunting image. Thousands of armored bodies piled together, a silent, chaotic snapshot of an event that drew them in almost unimaginable numbers. These mass assemblages are more than just geological curiosities. They are behavioral fossils, tantalizing clues that whisper of complex, synchronized behaviors in these ancient arthropods. What great, irresistible force could compel these normally solitary, perhaps cannibalistic predators to gather in such dense, teeming swarms? Paleontologists have contemplated this mystery for decades, and two primary, compelling hypotheses have emerged, both rooted in the fundamental, cyclical needs of life. The first, and perhaps most dramatic hypothesis, is that these were mass mating events, vast seasonal spawning aggregations. Imagine a specific time of year, perhaps dictated by the lunar cycle or a subtle shift in water temperature, when an ancient, instinctual imperative was triggered. Eurypterids from across a wide region, guided by chemical cues or some other shared signal, would begin to migrate, traveling towards specific sheltered, shallow water lagoons or estuaries, the ancestral breeding grounds. Picture this scene: the shallow waters, perhaps only a few meters deep, begin to churn, not with waves, but with the movement of thousands, perhaps millions, of armored bodies. Swarms of Eurypterus, males and females, converge in a chaotic, competitive, and vital dance of reproduction. This behavior is not unknown in their living relatives. Modern horseshoe crabs, the closest living cousins of the Eurypterids, still perform this ancient ritual, crawling ashore in vast armored throngs under the full moon to lay their eggs in the sand. Perhaps the Eurypterids did something similar, gathering in these shallow, protected waters to find mates, to clasp, and to deposit their fertilized eggs in the relative safety of the muddy bottom, away from the larger predators of the open sea. The mass fossil assemblages in this view represent the aftermath of such an event, perhaps a sudden, catastrophic change in the lagoon's conditions, like a storm, a sudden drop in oxygen, or a rapid change in salinity, that trapped and killed a vast portion of the breeding population in a single moment, preserving their panicked final gathering for us to find 400 million years later. The second major hypothesis is perhaps less dramatic, but equally rooted in the fundamental biology of arthropods. This is the idea that these were not spawning grounds, but molting grounds. We must remember that a Eurypterid, like any arthropod, was trapped within its own rigid, ungrowing external skeleton. To get larger, it had to molt, a process called ecdysis. It had to shed its old, tight armor and grow a new, larger one, which would then harden. This molting process is the single most vulnerable time in an arthropod's life. Imagine the creature having just struggled out of its old, split exoskeleton. Its new, underlying cuticle is soft, pliant, and utterly defenseless. Its limbs are weak, its body like jelly. It cannot hunt, it cannot fight, and it can barely move. It is a soft, perfect, helpless meal for any predator, including, and perhaps especially, other Eurypterids. What if these mass assemblages represent molting grounds, vast sheltered areas where thousands of Eurypterids gathered together to molt in relative safety. There would be safety in numbers. The sheer density of molting individuals might overwhelm the senses of predators, making it statistically less likely for any one individual to be targeted. Or perhaps they gathered in these specific lagoons because the water chemistry was ideal for the molting process, or because the area offered abundant hiding places among rocks or primitive aquatic plants. The fossil layers in this interpretation would not be a snapshot of a single, catastrophic death event, but rather an accumulation over time. They would be the discarded clothes of the Eurypterids, the cast-off exoskeletons or exuviae, which would settle to the bottom and be buried, perhaps mixed with the bodies of individuals who did not survive the perilous molting process. Indeed, many mass assemblages are composed largely of these shed skins, rather than complete bodies, lending strong support to this quiet biological hypothesis. The truth may be a combination of both. Perhaps these sheltered lagoons were ideal for both molting and mating, serving as vital multi-purpose hubs in the life cycle of these creatures. A place to gather, to grow, to reproduce, and inevitably, to die. To contemplate these mass gatherings is to add another layer of complexity to these ancient creatures. They were not just solitary, mindless hunters. They were capable of complex, synchronized communal behaviors, driven by deep, ancient instincts. The image of the swarm is transformed from a vision of a mindless plague to a more poignant, more intimate portrait of a population drawn together for the most fundamental acts of life: growth and reproduction. The silent, tangled mats of fossils whisper of these ancient, vital, and perhaps perilous gatherings. Whether these vast, silent gatherings were for mating, for molting, or perhaps for both, the act of ecdysis, of shedding the armor, was a central, recurring, and incredibly perilous event in the life of every single Eurypterid, from the smallest Eurypterus to the colossal Jaekelopterus. To understand their lives, we must understand this process, this profound vulnerability inherent in their very design. The armor, that magnificent, jointed exoskeleton, was the Eurypterid's greatest strength. It was its shield against predators, its scaffold for muscle, its sensory interface with the world. But it was also, in a profound sense, its prison. The chitinous cuticle, once hardened, could not grow. It was a rigid, unyielding shell. The living creature inside, however, continued to consume, to metabolize, to grow. Inevitably, a moment would come when the soft tissues of the Eurypterid had filled its armor completely. It would become tight, restrictive. To continue living, to achieve the next stage of its life, it had to escape this self-made prison. Let us try to picture this quiet, delicate, and deeply dangerous process. It would begin with the Eurypterid, perhaps guided by instinct, seeking a sheltered, safe location, a crevice between rocks, a dense thicket of primitive aquatic seaweed, or perhaps the communal safety of one of those vast molting grounds. The creature would become still, quiescent. Hormonal changes within its body would be triggering a complex sequence of events. The first step was invisible. The living tissues beneath the old hard armor, the epidermis, would begin to separate from it. A new, soft, incredibly thin and wrinkled cuticle, the blueprint for the next, larger exoskeleton, would be secreted beneath the old one. At the same time, the creature's body would begin to reabsorb some of the minerals from the innermost layers of the old shell, thinning it, weakening it, recycling those precious materials. Then the creature would begin to swell, perhaps by gulping water, increasing the pressure inside the old, weakening shell. A critical line of weakness, a predetermined suture, often running around the margin of the head shield or carapace, would begin to split. Imagine the seam opening, a tiny crack appearing. With slow, perhaps agonizingly difficult muscular contractions, the Eurypterid would begin to pull itself agonizingly out of its old self. The head shield would lift off or split like the lid of a box, and the creature, soft, pale, and utterly defenseless, would slowly, painstakingly extract its entire complex body from the old, rigid casing. It would pull its 6 pairs of limbs, including the complex paddles and grasping claws, out from their old, hollow coverings, like pulling fingers from a tight glove. It would draw its entire segmented abdomen and tail, segment by segment, out of the old husk. This process might take hours. It was a moment of supreme effort and supreme vulnerability. And the creature that emerged was a ghost of its former self. It was larger, yes, its new wrinkled skin holding the potential for growth, but it was incredibly soft, pliant, almost gelatinous. Its limbs were weak, unable to support its weight or deliver a powerful swimming stroke. Its claws were useless, its armor non-existent. It was a soft, perfect, helpless meal. In this moment, it was at the mercy of the world. A small fish, a passing cephalopod, or most terrifyingly, another hard-shelled Eurypterid, would find it an easy target. This is why molting in a safe, hidden place, or in the confusing swarm of a mass molting ground, was so essential. Once free, the creature would continue to pump itself full of water, expanding its new, soft, flexible cuticle to its maximum new size, like inflating a balloon. Then it would have to wait, hiding, quiescent, as its body slowly secreted the minerals needed to harden the new armor, to tan the proteins, to fix its new, larger form. This hardening process might take days. Only when the new armor was firm would the Eurypterid be able to move, to hunt, to defend itself once more. It had successfully passed the bottleneck of growth. The fossil record is filled with the evidence of this process. Those mass assemblages of Eurypterus are often composed primarily of the exuviae, the shed, empty husks, thin and delicate, preserving the creature's form like a pressed flower, a testament to these countless moments of vulnerability and renewal. To contemplate this process is to understand the cyclical, perilous nature of arthropod life. It is to see that strength and vulnerability are two sides of the same coin, that to grow, these armored masters had to periodically abandon their armor, becoming utterly soft and defenseless. It was the biological price they paid for their rigid, protective design, a quiet, recurring drama of self-rebirth played out in the hidden corners of the ancient seas. We have lingered for some time on the spectacular giants and the universal perilous process of growth that defined all Eurypterids. But to focus only on the colossal Jaekelopterus or the immense swarms of Eurypterus is to miss the true breadth, the quiet, hidden richness of this ancient dynasty. The giants, for all their awe-inspiring grandeur, were the exceptions, the outliers. The true story of the Eurypterids, the secret to their 150 million year success, lies in their profound and often small-scale diversity. Let us now adjust our focus. We pull back from the awe-inspiring 8-foot shadow of Jaekelopterus and the dense, swirling swarms of hand-sized Eurypterus. Let us look instead into the margins, the quiet corners, the overlooked ecosystems of the Paleozoic seas and rivers. Here, a far richer, more complex story unfolds. The vast majority of Eurypterid species were not giants. Many were small, some perhaps only a few centimeters long, no larger than a modern shrimp. And they were not all paddle-swimming predators. Evolution, having established the basic, successful Eurypterid blueprint, began to tinker, to adapt, to specialize this form in myriad ways, creating a vast portfolio of species, each suited for a specific way of life. Imagine the complex, shallow water reefs of the Silurian, built by strange corals and sponges, teeming with crinoids and brachiopods. Gliding above, the Pterygotus might have been the lion, but the ecosystem also needed its foxes, its badgers, its hyenas. Some Eurypterids, belonging to families like the Silurian, never evolved those large swimming paddles at all. Their sixth pair of limbs remained long, slender, multi-jointed walking legs, just like the ones in front. Picture these creatures, like Silurian itself. They were not active swimmers, but dedicated walkers, bottom dwellers. They likely scuttled across the seafloor on their long, stilt-like legs, perhaps moving with a strange, spider-like grace. They may have been scavengers, using their small, delicate chelicerae to pick apart carcasses that had fallen to the seafloor. Or perhaps they were specialized predators of the mud, probing the sediment for worms and small burrowing trilobites. They were the quiet pedestrians of the Eurypterid world, their success built on walking, not swimming. Other lineages, like the aptly named Carcinosoma, evolved a different, almost comical body shape. They were broad, rounded, almost crab-like, with a short, abruptly tapering tail. Their legs were stout, their claws perhaps robust. These were likely not fast swimmers, but powerful, heavy-bodied bottom dwellers, perhaps inhabiting burrows or using their bulk to bulldoze through the mud, preying on shellfish or other slow-moving invertebrates. And consider the sheer variety in weaponry. We saw the giant, toothed claws of Pterygotus and the spiny, basket-like limbs of Mixopterus. This specialization reflects a huge range of diets. Some small Eurypterids with very simple, tiny chelicerae might not have been predators at all in the active sense. Perhaps they were detritivores, sifting through the organic ooze on the seafloor, consuming the microscopic bounty within it, much like modern catfish or crabs. They were the recyclers, the quiet custodians of the ecosystem. This diversity extended to every aspect of their anatomy. The shape of the carapace varied from square to round to triangular. The position and size of the compound eyes shifted, some suited for panoramic vision, others perhaps more focused. The length and shape of the telson, the tail spike, was incredibly varied, from the broad rudder of Pterygotus to the long, sharp spike of Eurypterus to the strangely curved hook of Mixopterus. Each of these variations represents a different species, a different evolutionary answer to the question of survival. This hidden diversity is the true measure of the Eurypterids' success. They were not a one-trick pony, not just a lineage of giant swimmers. They were a dynasty that produced specialists for almost every aquatic niche imaginable in the Paleozoic world. Giant apex predators, yes, but also medium-sized generalists, small, scuttling scavengers, bizarre, spiny trappers, and perhaps even humble mud-eaters. This is why they endured for so long. When conditions changed, when the open seas became more dangerous with the rise of fish, some lineages, like the giants, retreated to freshwater. Others, perhaps the smaller, more generalist forms, adapted to the new predators, or specialized in food sources the fish ignored. To contemplate this hidden diversity is to appreciate the full, rich tapestry of the Eurypterid story. It is to understand that for every spectacular giant whose fossils inspire awe, there were perhaps 100 smaller, stranger, quieter cousins living out their lives in the overlooked corners of the ancient world. The true swarm was not just one of abundance, but one of form, a proliferation of endless, armored variations on a single, successful, ancient theme. The Eurypterid dynasty was not just a story of paddle swimmers and simple walkers. As this great family of armored arthropods diversified, it produced lineages that experimented with truly bizarre and often intimidating anatomical structures, creating specialists for niche roles in the Paleozoic arms race. Among the strangest and most formidable-looking of these specialists was the genus Mixopterus. Let us travel back to the Silurian period, perhaps to the shallow coastal seas or lagoons of what is now Norway or North America. Here, scuttling across the seabed, or perhaps lying in wait, is a creature that seems almost extravagantly armed, a biological nightmare of spikes and claws. Mixopterus was a medium to large Eurypterid, perhaps reaching a meter or more in length, but its size was not its most terrifying feature. Its strangeness lay in the extreme modification of its forward limbs. Picture this creature. It has the familiar Eurypterid body, a solid carapace, a segmented abdomen, and a long, tapering tail spike, perhaps unusually curved in this genus. It possesses the characteristic large swimming paddles at the rear of its head shield, suggesting it was a capable swimmer. But it is the front two pairs of walking legs, the ones immediately behind the small, pincer-like chelicerae, that have been transformed into something extraordinary. These limbs are not slender walking legs. They are massively developed, elongated, and covered in an astonishing array of long, fixed, blade-like spines, all pointing inwards and forwards. The final segment of these limbs perhaps also terminated in a pincer or claw, but the entire appendage was, in essence, a heavily armed grappling hook. Imagine these four spiny limbs, two on each side, held forward, forming a dense, interlocking basket of thorns beneath the creature's head. This was not a tool for delicate manipulation or sifting through mud. This was a cage, a trap, a weapon of brutal efficiency. How did Mixopterus live? It was almost certainly a predator, but its anatomy suggests a different strategy from the open water pursuit of Pterygotus. Mixopterus was likely a sit-and-wait ambush predator, a benthic or bottom-dwelling hunter. Let us try to visualize its hunting posture. It lies low against the muddy or sandy bottom, its mottled, armored body providing camouflage. Its large swimming paddles are perhaps braced against the sediment, anchoring it, while its rear walking legs keep it stable. And at the front, it holds that terrifying spiny basket open, motionless, waiting. A primitive jawless fish, an unwary trilobite, or perhaps even a smaller, swifter Eurypterus swims too close, drawn in perhaps by curiosity or the illusion of a safe hiding place among what looks like debris. In a fraction of a second, with a powerful muscular contraction, Mixopterus snaps this spiny cage shut. The interlocking spines form an escape-proof prison, impaling the victim from multiple directions. There is no struggle, only capture. The prey, hopelessly trapped within this thorny embrace, is then brought in towards the creature's underside, where the grinding leg bases, the gnathobases, begin their slow, methodical work of dismembering and consuming it. This was a highly specialized form of predation, relying on camouflage, patience, and a single explosive burst of trapping power. It was a strategy that required less energy than active pursuit, and it was perfectly suited for the often murky, complex environments of the Silurian shallows. The sheer extravagance of the spines on Mixopterus and its close relatives, the Mixopterids, sets them apart. They represent another evolutionary pathway, another branch of the Eurypterid tree that invested heavily in specialized weaponry, creating a kind of spiny-armed guild of predators, distinct from the giant-clawed Pterygotids or the generalist Eurypterids. To contemplate Mixopterus is to be confronted with the sheer, almost baroque creativity of the evolutionary arms race. It is a reminder that the Eurypterid dynasty was not a single, monotonous lineage, but a vibrant explosion of different forms, each finding its own unique and sometimes terrifying way to hunt, to survive, and to thrive in a world already filled with armor and danger. Mixopterus was the living bear trap of the Silurian seabed, a spiny specialist from evolution's gallery of ancient nightmares, waiting patiently in the mud. We have explored these armored creatures as masters of the aquatic realm, from the giant, open-water swimmers like Pterygotus to the spiny, bottom-dwelling ambushers like Mixopterus. Their entire anatomy, the gills protected beneath their bodies, the swimming paddles, the streamlined forms, screams, water. And yet, for decades, a tantalizing, almost unbelievable question has lingered in the background of Eurypterid paleontology. Could they, at least for brief, desperate moments, leave the water and haul their armored bodies onto the land? The evidence for this startling idea comes not primarily from their body fossils, but from the trace fossils they left behind, their footprints. In ancient Paleozoic rock layers, dating from the late Ordovician through the Devonian, paleontologists have found mysterious, large arthropod trackways. These tracks were not made underwater. They were impressed in sediments that appear to have been damp, exposed terrestrial sandflats or intertidal mudflats, environments at the very boundary between water and air. Imagine these tracks, two parallel lines of small, perhaps V-shaped or crescent-shaped impressions, the marks of jointed legs pushing into the damp sand. And often, running down the middle is a long, continuous groove or series of scratches, the mark, perhaps, of a heavy body being dragged, or a long, sharp telson scraping the ground. The sheer size of some of these trackways, like the famous Protischnites, is too large for any known terrestrial arthropod of that early time, like the first millipedes. The only creatures alive in that period, with the right size, body plan, and leg structure to make such marks, were the Eurypterids. This implies an astonishing scene, a scene that shatters our image of them as purely aquatic beings. Let us try to picture it, perhaps on a tidal flat 430 million years ago. The air is empty, silent, save for the wind and the distant lap of the waves. The land is barren rock and mud, and then, from the shallow water, something emerges. A Eurypterus, perhaps, or a related walking adapted form, heaves its armored body out of the familiar, buoyant embrace of the water and onto the shore. It would have been an immense, laborious struggle. In the water, its body was weightless, supported. Here on land, it is suddenly subject to the full crushing force of gravity. Its legs, perhaps adapted for scuttling on the seabed, but not for supporting its full weight in the air, strain under the load. It likely moved with a slow, agonizing, belly-dragging crawl, its limbs splayed, its body scraping the mud, leaving that telltale central groove. Why would they undertake such a perilous, exhausting journey? Why leave the safety and support of the water for the hostile, dry, high-gravity realm of the land? The most compelling hypothesis, once again, comes from their closest living relatives, the horseshoe crabs. As we noted, horseshoe crabs still perform this ancient ritual, crawling ashore in vast numbers to lay their eggs in the sand, safe from the teeming aquatic predators of the shallows. Perhaps the Eurypterids did the same. Imagine a Silurian beach under a pale sun or a large ancient moon. Not one, but hundreds, perhaps thousands of Eurypterids are crawling laboriously out of the surf, dragging themselves up the damp sand to dig shallow nests and deposit their eggs. For a few hours, the beach is a moving, armored carpet of these strange creatures, driven by the same reproductive imperative that still guides the horseshoe crabs today. This would be a mass stranding, but a deliberate one, a vital, vulnerable phase of their life cycle. Other reasons are possible. Perhaps they were moving between adjacent pools or lagoons, taking short overland treks to escape a drying pond or to find new, richer feeding grounds. Or perhaps they were driven ashore by predators in the water, sacrificing mobility for the temporary safety of the land, where no large carnivores yet existed. Some might even have ventured out to scavenge on the bodies of other creatures washed ashore, a brief, opportunistic meal. Could they breathe? Their book gills were delicate, designed for water, but their placement, protected beneath the body, might have kept them moist, allowing them to absorb some oxygen from the air for a limited time, as long as they didn't dry out. Their armor, which was their prison, also became their spacesuit, preventing rapid desiccation. This was not a conquest of the land. The Eurypterids were not, and never became, terrestrial animals. Their forays onto the shore were likely brief, desperate, and undertaken only for the most vital reasons, to reproduce or to escape death. The true conquest of land by arthropods would be left to their distant cousins, the ancestors of insects, spiders, and the true scorpions. But this behavior, these tantalizing footprints in the ancient sand, adds another profound layer of strangeness and adaptability to the Eurypterids. It paints a picture of a creature living at the boundary of two worlds, capable not just of ruling the shallows, but of daring, however clumsily, to step out into the vast, empty, alien world of the air. A brief, armored astronaut crawling on an ancient beach, leaving the first large footprints on a world that was not yet ready for them. For tens of millions of years, through the Silurian and into the early Devonian, the Eurypterids had reigned supreme. Their armored bodies, their specialized claws, their powerful swimming paddles, and their sheer, colossal size in forms like Pterygotus and Jaekelopterus had made them the undisputed apex predators of the shallow seas and freshwater rivers. They were the masters of their world, the pinnacle of invertebrate evolution, ruling over an ecosystem of trilobites, orthocones, and the slow, heavily armored, jawless fish. But the history of life is a story of constant, relentless change. No dynasty, no matter how powerful, rules forever. And as the Devonian period unfolded, an age that would later be known not as the Age of Sea Scorpions, but as the Age of Fishes, a new and profoundly different kind of predator was rising, evolving a set of biological innovations that would ultimately shatter the long reign of the arthropod kings and redefine the very nature of predation in the world's waters. This was the rise of the vertebrates, our own distant lineage. We must remember that fish had been present alongside the Eurypterids for a long time, but for millions of years they were primarily the prey, the slow, jawless, bottom-dwelling ostracoderms, their only defense a heavy, cumbersome suit of bony armor. They were the hunted, not the hunters. But evolution was tinkering with the vertebrate blueprint, and it produced two revolutionary adaptations. The first was the evolution of fins, not just simple stabilizers, but complex paired fins, pectorals and pelvics, that allowed for incredible agility, precise steering, and rapid acceleration, far exceeding the oar-like paddling of the Eurypterids. The second and most transformative innovation was the jaw. The evolution of the jaw, derived perhaps from the gill arches of their jawless ancestors, was a biological cataclysm. It armed the vertebrates with a weapon of terrifying efficiency, a mouth that could bite, grasp, crush, and shear with immense power. Imagine the Devonian seas now. New creatures are appearing. Early sharks, like Cladocelae, are gliding through the water, streamlined, agile, and equipped with rows of sharp, replaceable teeth. And perhaps most significantly for the Eurypterids, the placoderms, the plate-skinned fish, exploded in diversity and size. We have met their most famous member, Dunkleosteus, the armored giant with bone-shearing blades for jaws. This creature and its relatives were the new apex predators of the open ocean. They were large, heavily armored like the Eurypterids, but they combined this protection with the immense crushing power of a true hinged jaw. The ecological tables were beginning to turn. Consider the confrontation. A large Eurypterid, perhaps a late surviving Pterygotus, gliding through the Devonian Sea, encounters a medium-sized placoderm. The Eurypterid, for millions of years the undisputed hunter, might strike with its toothed claws. But the placoderm is itself armored, its body shielded, and it can fight back, not just with defensive spines, but with a powerful, forward-facing bite. Or imagine the giant Dunkleosteus, 10 meters long, cruising the open water. A Eurypterid, even a giant Jaekelopterus that had strayed from its freshwater river system, would be no match for a creature of this size and power. The Eurypterid's grasping claws were designed to hunt smaller, armored fish. The placoderm's jaws were designed to shatter armor. The Eurypterid, for the first time in its long history, was no longer the apex predator. It was now, potentially, the prey. This new, intense competition from the rising vertebrate dynasty fundamentally altered the Eurypterid's world. The open seas, once their kingdom, were becoming increasingly dangerous, patrolled by these new, fast, powerful, and intelligent, by comparison, jawed hunters. The evolutionary arms race, which the Eurypterids had dominated for so long, had just been joined by a player with a radically superior weapon. This rising vertebrate pressure is likely what drove the largest Eurypterids, like Jaekelopterus, into the relative safety of freshwater rivers, where these large marine predators could not, or had not yet, followed. It was a strategic retreat, an attempt to find a new niche, a new kingdom to rule where they could remain at the top of the food chain. But even this was a temporary solution. The age of fishes was dawning everywhere, in freshwater as well as salt. New forms of large, predatory, lobe-finned fish, the ancestors of tetrapods, were also evolving in these same river systems. The world was changing. The Eurypterid's long, slow, 150 million year day was drawing to a close. The rise of the jawed fish was the signal of their twilight. The armored masters, the invertebrate kings, had finally met their match. Their dynasty, built on claws and paddles, was about to give way to a new dynasty built on jaws, fins, and bone. The seas were being conquered by a new king. The rise of the jawed fishes, particularly the great placoderms and the early agile sharks, was not just the arrival of a new neighbor. It was a fundamental shift in the very nature of competition, a rewriting of the rules of predation and survival in the Devonian seas. The Eurypterids, which had held the throne of apex predator for tens of millions of years, suddenly faced a rival with a completely different and in many ways superior set of biological technologies. The long, slow twilight of the armored arthropods was initiated by this changing of the guard. Imagine the established Eurypterid predator, a Pterygotus, a master of its craft. Its success was built on a specific toolkit: a tough exoskeleton for defense, large compound eyes for spotting movement, grasping claws for seizing prey, and paddles for swimming. This was a highly effective system for hunting slow, armored, jawless fish and armored trilobites. But now consider the new competitor, a mid-sized, jawed placoderm, or an early shark like Cladocelash. These vertebrates brought entirely new advantages to the arms race. First, and most critically, was the jaw. The Eurypterid's chelicerae, its grasping claws, were external appendages, powerful for gripping and tearing but perhaps less efficient at delivering a single, catastrophic, disabling blow. The vertebrate jaw, in contrast, was an internal, bone-supported, muscle-driven device, capable of immense crushing or shearing force, delivered directly by the head. A Dunkleosteus didn't just grasp its prey, it shattered it. This was a level of raw power that the Eurypterid's grasping tools simply could not match. Second was speed and agility. The Eurypterid's paddle swimming system, while effective, was likely less efficient and capable of less sustained speed than the vertebrate model. Fish, with their flexible internal skeletons, powerful muscular bodies, and an array of stabilizing and steering fins, dorsal, pectoral, pelvic, were masters of three-dimensional movement in water. They were likely faster, more maneuverable, and possessed greater stamina than even the most streamlined Eurypterid. In a chase, the new vertebrate predators would almost certainly have the advantage, both in pursuing prey and in escaping the Eurypterids themselves. Third, perhaps, was sensory sophistication and intelligence. While the Eurypterids' compound eyes were excellent motion detectors, the vertebrate brain, with its complex optic lobes and, crucially, its highly developed lateral line system, an organ that could feel the faintest pressure changes and vibrations in the water, allowing fish to sense prey and predators from a distance, even in total darkness, gave them a sensory edge. The vertebrate brain was, arguably, a more powerful processing unit, allowing for more complex behaviors, faster reactions, and better learning. The Eurypterids, for all their success, were suddenly outgunned, outmaneuvered, and perhaps outthought. This changing competition would have had cascading effects. The Eurypterids' traditional food sources, the armored, jawless fish and trilobites, were also being preyed upon, perhaps more efficiently, by the new jawed fishes, leading to increased competition for the same diminishing resources. And the Eurypterids themselves, particularly the smaller and medium-sized ones, were now firmly on the menu for these new, powerful predators. The ecological niches they had dominated for so long were being squeezed from all sides. They were being outcompeted for food, and they were being actively hunted by a new, more effective class of predator. This intense pressure is the most likely reason we see the decline in Eurypterid diversity and size throughout the Devonian period. The giants, like Jaekelopterus, as we noted, seemingly retreated to freshwater refuges, a strategic move to avoid direct competition with the large marine placoderms. But even that was a temporary haven. Other lineages, unable to compete or adapt, simply dwindled and disappeared. The evolutionary arms race had produced a new weapon, the vertebrate jaw and body plan, and the long successful reign of the arthropod kings was simply unable to counter it. It was not a sudden, violent overthrow, perhaps. It was a slow ecological marginalization, a gradual fading from dominance into rarity. The Eurypterids were being quietly, relentlessly, and irreversibly replaced. The changing competition, the rise of our own vertebrate ancestors, was the beginning of the end for these magnificent, armored, and ultimately outdated rulers of the ancient seas. The rise of the jawed fishes was the catalyst. The Devonian period, which had dawned with the colossal Eurypterid Jaekelopterus ruling its freshwater rivers, was now, in its middle and late stages, truly the age of fishes. The open seas were commanded by the bone-crushing placoderms, and the rivers and lakes were increasingly patrolled by large predatory lobe-finned fish and early sharks. The ecological landscape had been fundamentally rewritten. For the Eurypterids, the long reign was over, and the slow, inevitable decline had begun. This decline was not a single, sudden event, but a gradual fading, a slow marginalization, written in the stone of the fossil record. It is a story told in diminishing diversity and shrinking size. Imagine the Eurypterid family tree throughout the Devonian. In the early Devonian, it was still a vibrant, branching bush, with giants like Jaekelopterus at its apex, and diverse specialized forms like Pterygotus still present, perhaps in their freshwater refuges. But as the millions of years passed, as the vertebrate predators diversified and spread, this bush began to be pruned branch by branch. The giants, the most spectacular and specialized forms, were the first to go. Creatures like Jaekelopterus and Pterygotus, with their immense size, required vast territories and an abundant, reliable food source. In a world now shared with increasingly efficient vertebrate competitors, their high-energy, apex predator lifestyle likely became unsustainable. Their food sources were being contested, and they themselves were perhaps now targets. By the end of the Devonian, these colossal Eurypterid lineages had vanished completely, leaving no descendants. The era of the 8-foot arthropod was over, a brief, spectacular flourish that could not be maintained against the new vertebrate dynasty. Other, less gigantic but still specialized lineages also began to falter. The diverse families of swimming Eurypterids that had dominated the Silurian seas found themselves outmaneuvered and outcompeted by the faster, more agile fish. Their numbers dwindled, their geographic ranges shrank. Many simply disappeared from the fossil record, unable to find a niche in this new, more dangerous world. What remained of the Eurypterid dynasty were the survivors, the lineages that, through chance or adaptation, managed to cling to existence in the shadow of the fishes. These were often not the large swimmers, but perhaps the smaller, more generalist forms, the bottom dwellers, the walkers, creatures that could eke out a living in marginal environments, perhaps in brackish, oxygen-poor lagoons, or shallow, temporary ponds where the larger predatory fish could not easily venture. Or perhaps they survived by adopting a quieter lifestyle, becoming primarily scavengers, or specializing in prey so small or obscure that the larger fish ignored them. Their dominance was gone. They were no longer the kings. They were now the subjects, relegated to the fringes and the overlooked corners of the aquatic world. The Great Devonian Mass Extinction, which occurred late in the period and dealt a devastating blow to many marine groups, including, ironically, the mighty placoderms like Dunkleosteus, seems to have hit the already declining Eurypterids hard as well. Many of the remaining specialized lineages were finally extinguished during this global crisis, further reducing the diversity of the once great order. By the time the Devonian period drew to its close, the Eurypterid dynasty was a shadow of its former self. The giants were gone. The great diversity of swimming predators was gone. The oceans, once swarming with their armored forms, were now firmly and forever the territory of the vertebrates. The Eurypterid story was not yet over, but it had entered its final, quiet chapters. A few hardy survivors, the last remnants of a fallen empire, would persist, but their long, 150 million year day in the sun was definitively setting. The twilight had come. The Devonian period drew to a close, its seas now firmly ruled by the triumphant vertebrates, the sharks and the diverse bony fishes that had risen to dominance. The Eurypterid empire, shattered by this new competition and winnowed by the late Devonian extinction events, was gone. The giants were memories. The swarms were dispersed. But the story of the sea scorpions as a dynasty was not quite over. A few hardy, tenacious lineages, the last remnants of their magnificent, armored past, managed to cling to life, surviving into the next geological period, the Carboniferous. Imagine the world of the Carboniferous, the great coal age we have visited before, the world that birthed the giant dragonflies and the colossal Arthropleura on land. The climate was warm, wet, and the continents were dominated by vast, steaming, swampy forests. In the aquatic realm, the vertebrates continued to diversify. Sharks of bizarre forms like Stethocanthus, the anvil shark, patrolled the seas, and large crocodile-like amphibians, temnospondyls, haunted the freshwater swamps. In this new, vertebrate-dominated world, the Eurypterids were no longer kings, not even nobles. They were refugees, ghosts, relegated to the most marginal of environments, the hidden corners where their vertebrate competitors perhaps struggled to thrive. The few Eurypterid genera that survived into the Carboniferous, like the bizarre walking-adapted Hibbertopterus, were often not found in the open seas at all. Their fossils are discovered in rocks that suggest they had become specialists of quiet, perhaps oxygen-poor, freshwater environments, coal swamps, sluggish river deltas, temporary lakes. They were no longer the apex predators. They were likely bottom-dwelling scavengers or detritivores, scuttling slowly through the mud and decaying vegetation at the bottom of these dark, swampy waters, using their perhaps rake-like front limbs to sift through the ooze for worms, small crustaceans, or rotting plant matter. Picture Hibbertopterus itself. It was a giant in its own right, perhaps reaching nearly 2 meters in length, but it was not a sleek hunter like Pterygotus. It was broad, heavy, almost comically wide, with no swimming paddles, only stout, powerful walking legs. It was a slow-moving, tank-like creature, perhaps spending its days trudging through the muck, a giant aquatic street sweeper, a scavenger king of the swamp bottom, feeding on the scraps left by the amphibians and fish. Other, smaller Eurypterid lineages may have persisted in brackish or even hypersaline lagoons, environments too harsh, too salty, or too changeable for the more successful predatory fish to dominate, providing a temporary stressed refuge for the last of the armored arthropods. Their decline continued. Throughout the long span of the Carboniferous, their diversity, already critically low, dwindled even further. They were a rare archaic holdover, a living fossil from a bygone age, clinging to existence in a world that no longer belonged to them. And then, as the Carboniferous gave way to the Permian period, the final chapter of the Paleozoic Era, the age of Pangaea and the rise of the synapsids, the Eurypterid dynasty was reduced to perhaps just a single family, a final, tenuous thread. These last survivors, like the genus Jaekelopterus, were small, unassuming creatures, fossils of which are found in the brackish or freshwater deposits of the Permian, still clinging to those same marginal, quiet water refuges, shadows in a world now ruled on land by Dimetrodon and in the seas by advanced sharks and bony fish. They had endured for over 200 million years. They had risen to become the planet's first giant apex predators. They had swarmed in shallow seas, walked on ancient beaches, and ruled freshwater rivers. They had survived multiple mass extinction events, including the devastating End Ordovician and End Devonian crises. They were, by any measure, one of the most successful and enduring dynasties in the history of life. But now, reduced to a handful of small, obscure species in forgotten swamps, their long, magnificent story was reaching its absolute final page. The world was once again changing, barreling towards a catastrophe that would dwarf all others, a global firestorm that would spare not even these last, most tenacious, armored survivors. The Eurypterid lineage was now a mere shadow of its former glory, a whisper from a forgotten age. Gone were the 8-foot giants. Gone were the diverse paddle-swimming hunters of the Silurian seas. Gone were the vast, teeming swarms. All that remained by the time the Permian period reached its close, perhaps 252 million years ago, was a handful of small, highly specialized and obscure species, clinging to life in the quiet marginal refuges of freshwater swamps and brackish lagoons on the supercontinent of Pangaea. They were the last lonely survivors of a 200 million year dynasty. They had weathered so much. They had seen the rise and fall of the Orthocone giants. They had endured the Ordovician Ice Age. They had faced the competitive onslaught of the jawed fishes and survived, albeit diminished, in the shadows. They were, perhaps, the ultimate symbol of ancient arthropod resilience. But the world, as we have explored in previous journeys, was about to face a catastrophe so profound, so all-encompassing, that it would dwarf all previous extinction events. A crisis that would not just prune the tree of life, but burn the entire forest to the ground. The Great Dying was approaching. Imagine those last swamp-dwelling Eurypterids, perhaps Jaekelopterus, scuttling through the mud at the bottom of a Permian coal swamp, hunting for worms, oblivious to the planetary-scale disaster unfolding. Deep within the earth, in what is now Siberia, the colossal flood basalts, the Siberian traps, began their million-year eruption. The atmosphere was poisoned with carbon dioxide and sulfur, triggering a runaway greenhouse effect and toxic acid rain. The oceans warmed, acidified, and lost their breath, becoming vast, suffocating graveyards. On land, the forests died, the soils eroded, and temperatures soared to lethal levels. The entire global biosphere, on land and in the sea, was collapsing. For the Eurypterids, there was no refuge left. Their freshwater swamps and coastal lagoons, which had been their safe havens from the larger predators of the open ocean, were not spared. These shallow water environments were perhaps the most vulnerable to the rapidly changing conditions. They would have been directly hit by the toxic, acidic rain, their water chemistry turning poisonous. They would have been choked with sediment and dead organic matter washing in from the collapsing terrestrial ecosystems around them, leading to rapid, localized anoxia or oxygen starvation. And as global temperatures soared, these shallow water bodies would heat up quickly, perhaps even evaporating entirely during prolonged greenhouse-driven droughts. Their marginal refuges became death traps. The last hardy species that had endured for so long, the final thread of this magnificent lineage, simply could not cope with an environmental assault of this magnitude, striking simultaneously from all directions. The chemical poisoning, the loss of oxygen, the extreme heat, the collapse of their food webs. It was too much, too fast, too total. Sometime during this catastrophic interval at the very end of the Permian period, the last Eurypterid on Earth took its final gill-drawn breath and died. Its death was not a dramatic, singular event. It was a quiet, unnoticed fading away. There was no dynasty to witness its passing, no great rivals to celebrate its fall. The new rulers, the dinosaurs, were not even yet born. Their ancestors were among the few, desperate synapsid and reptilian survivors struggling for their own existence. The Eurypterid dynasty ended in silence, its final members consumed by the same global firestorm that claimed the trilobites, the blastoids, and 90% of all other life on the planet. The book was closed. The 200-million-year-long story of the sea scorpions, the tale of their rise from humble arthropod ancestors to colossal apex predators and their long, slow decline into obscurity, had reached its final, definitive end. They vanished from the earth, leaving behind only their fossilized armor, their strange footprints on ancient beaches, and the mystery of their lost world, buried deep in the silent stone of the Paleozoic Era. The reign of the armored masters was, at last, truly over. The final curtain has fallen. The Great Dying, that profound planetary cataclysm, extinguished the last lingering embers of the Eurypterid dynasty. Their 200-million-year reign, from their Ordovician rise to their Permian demise, was over, sealed forever in the deep Paleozoic rocks. The oceans, scoured clean by the extinction, would eventually repopulate, but the great paddle-swimming, armor-plated predators would never return. Their specific evolutionary experiment, their unique solution to life in the water, was finished. And yet the story does not entirely end there. While the Eurypterids themselves are gone, their lineage, the ancient Chelicerates group, did not die out completely. A cousin, a contemporary that shared those same Paleozoic seas, managed to cling to existence, navigating not just the Permian extinction, but every subsequent cataclysm the planet has thrown at it, surviving, almost unchanged, into our modern world. To see the closest living echo of the sea scorpion, we must look not to the fossil beds, but to the shallow coastal waters of our own time, on the Atlantic coast of North America and the shores of Asia. Here, scuttling slowly across the sand and mud, is a creature that seems to have stepped directly out of the deep past, the Xiphosuran, the animal we call the horseshoe crab. Imagine this creature, perhaps as it crawls ashore on a spring high tide, part of a vast ancient spawning ritual. Its body is covered in a hard, domed brownish-green carapace, a single, unjointed shield remarkably similar in concept to the prosoma of its extinct Eurypterid cousins. Tucked beneath this helmet, it possesses jointed walking legs, and at the front a pair of small, pincer-like chelicerae for feeding. Its abdomen is segmented and fused into a rigid hexagonal plate, and extending from its rear is a long, stiff, spike-like telson, used not as a weapon, but as a lever to right itself if it is ever flipped onto its back. It is a living fossil in the truest sense. Creatures almost identical to modern horseshoe crabs, like Limulus, have been found in fossil deposits dating back over 400 million years, placing them as contemporaries to the great Eurypterids. They lived alongside Eurypterus and Pterygotus. They saw the rise and fall of the placoderms. They saw the dinosaurs come and go. They survived the Chicxulub asteroid. They have endured. Why? What is the secret to their astonishing longevity, their profound stability in a world where their giant, dominant cousins, the Eurypterids, failed? Perhaps the answer lies in their humility, their very lack of specialization. While the Eurypterids evolved into giant, active, specialized predators, locking themselves into an evolutionary arms race with the vertebrates, the horseshoe crabs pursued a quieter, more generalist strategy. They remained for the most part slow-moving, humble, bottom-dwelling scavengers and detritivores. They feed by sifting through the mud and sand, consuming worms, small mollusks, algae, and the decaying scraps left by others. Their needs are simple. Their armor provides excellent passive defense. Their ability to tolerate a wide range of salinities and even low oxygen conditions allows them to thrive in harsh, marginal coastal environments where other creatures might struggle. And their ancient mass-spawning reproductive strategy, laying thousands of eggs in the intertidal sands, ensures that despite heavy predation, at least some offspring will survive. They are not kings. They are survivors. They are the ultimate specialists in not going extinct. When we look at a living horseshoe crab, we are gazing upon a body plan that has been tested by deep time and found sufficient. We are seeing a direct, living link to the lost Paleozoic world. This creature is the closest living relative we have to the giant Eurypterids. Its armored carapace, its jointed legs, its chelicerate mouthparts, its long tail spike. These are the shared family traits, the anatomical heritage, connecting our modern world directly back to those ancient alien seas. The Eurypterid dynasty may be gone, but its legacy is not entirely silent. It whispers to us in the rustle of a horseshoe crab's shell as it crawls ashore, in the slow, ancient, and enduring rhythm of a life form that has outlasted almost everything. They are the quiet, armored heirs of a lost kingdom, the humble cousins who inherited the earth by simply refusing to change, carrying the genetic memory of the Paleozoic into the light of our modern day. The Eurypterid dynasty ended, its final embers extinguished by the all-consuming fire of the Great Dying at the end of the Permian. The oceans, scoured and emptied, eventually recovered. Life, resilient and creative, began to fill the vacant niches once more. New dynasties rose. The Mesozoic Era, the age of reptiles, dawned, bringing forth the great ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, and mosasaurs to rule the seas. The Cenozoic Era, the age of mammals, followed, producing the first whales, the seals, the dolphins. The vertebrates, who had first risen to challenge the Eurypterids in the Devonian, had now, definitively and permanently, inherited the world's oceans. But this raises a quiet, profound question. Why? Why, in the hundreds of millions of years since the Eurypterids vanished, has no other arthropod lineage, no crab, no lobster, no shrimp, no distant descendant of the horseshoe crab, ever risen again to challenge the vertebrates for the title of apex predator? Why did the age of giant, swimming, armor-plated arthropod kings never return? The answer is not simple. It is a complex interplay of environmental change, ecological competition, and perhaps the fundamental, inherent limitations of the arthropod body plan itself, a blueprint that had its glorious moment, but whose time as a ruler had passed. Perhaps the most significant factor was that the window of opportunity had closed, and it closed permanently. The Eurypterid giants, Pterygotus and Jaekelopterus rose to prominence in a world that was ecologically empty at the top. They faced no serious competition in the large predator niche. The vertebrates of their time were small, jawless, or just beginning to experiment with jaws and speed. The Eurypterids simply grew to fill a space that was waiting for them. But after the Permian extinction, and especially after the Triassic, that niche was never empty again. The survivors of the Great Dying and the new lineages that radiated in its aftermath included highly efficient, fast-evolving vertebrate predators. The early ichthyosaurs of the Triassic were already masters of aquatic pursuit. Advanced sharks and bony fish diversified rapidly, filling every corner of the ocean with agile, intelligent, jawed hunters. Any arthropod attempting to follow the Eurypterid path to evolve towards gigantism and open-water predation would now face immediate, overwhelming competition from these new, highly established vertebrate rulers. A medium-sized swimming arthropod would not be a rising king. It would be a slow, easy meal for a fast-moving fish or marine reptile. The ecological throne was now occupied and fiercely guarded by a new and superior dynasty. The vertebrates, with their internal skeletons allowing for more efficient muscle attachment and greater size potential, their powerful, jaw-based bites, and their complex brains, had simply become better at the job of being a large, aquatic predator. The environment, too, had changed. The Paleozoic era, particularly the Silurian and Devonian, may have been a time of uniquely high dissolved oxygen levels, fueling the high-energy metabolism required for such large, active arthropods. While oxygen levels have fluctuated since, the specific perfect storm of conditions that allowed arthropod gigantism in the water may have been a unique feature of that ancient Paleozoic world. And perhaps in the end there is a fundamental limitation to the arthropod design itself, at least in the water. The exoskeleton, that suit of armor, is a brilliant solution at smaller sizes, but as an animal grows larger, that armor becomes exponentially heavier, requiring more muscle power to move. The process of molting, that period of profound, soft-bodied vulnerability we explored, becomes exponentially more dangerous and energetically costly for a giant creature. A 2-ton glyptodon, a Cenozoic mammal, was armored, yes, but with living bone that grew with it. A hypothetical Jaekelopterus-sized creature in the modern ocean would have to shed its entire car-sized suit of armor periodically, a biological risk almost too immense to be viable in a world filled with sharks and whales. The Eurypterids' reign was a product of a specific, fleeting window in Earth's deep history. A time when the oceans were different, the air was different, and the vertebrate challenge had not yet fully materialized. They were the magnificent, brilliant, and ultimately temporary solution to the question of who rules the seas. Their failure to ever return is not a sign of their own inadequacy. It is instead the quiet testament to the enduring success of the vertebrate blueprint. It is the story of how our own lineage, with its internal skeleton, its powerful jaws, and its complex brain, rose to dominance and fundamentally, irrevocably, changed the rules of life in the ocean forever. The age of the giant arthropod kings was a beautiful alien chapter, but it was a chapter that, once finished, could never be written again. The dynasty is gone. The Eurypterids, those armored, paddle-swimming, and often giant masters of the Paleozoic seas, vanished from the Earth 250 million years ago, their final quiet end ensured by the all-consuming fires of the Great Dying. The vertebrates, the fish, the reptiles, and eventually the mammals inherited the oceans, and the age of giant arthropod kings passed forever into the realm of deep geological memory. What remains? Only their fossils, silent, stony fragments of armor, the beautiful, intricate impressions of their compound eyes, the toothed, formidable outlines of their grasping claws, the delicate fan-like traces of their swimming paddles, and the enigmatic sharp spikes of their telsons. These are the scattered pieces of a lost world, a puzzle painstakingly reassembled by paleontologists, allowing us, for a fleeting moment, to glimpse the sheer strangeness and magnificence of their long reign. These creatures haunt our imagination in a different way than the dinosaurs. Dinosaurs are familiar, almost. We see their descendants in the birds outside our windows. Their forms, bipedal hunters, giant, long-necked herbivores, are imprinted on our culture. But the Eurypterids, they represent something older, deeper, more alien. They come from a time before the world we know, a time before familiar forests, before amphibians truly walked the land, before the very continents had assembled into the forms we recognize. They are the ghosts of a truly lost ocean, a world whose rules were different, whose dominant players belonged to a different phylum, a different blueprint for life. To contemplate the Eurypterids is to be confronted with the sheer, almost whimsical creativity of evolution, but also its profound contingency. It is to recognize that the vertebrate dominance we take for granted was not inevitable. For over 150 million years, it was the arthropod, the sea scorpion, that held the title of apex predator in vast aquatic realms. Our own distant fish-like ancestors were the prey, the armored, skittering fodder for these giant, clawed hunters. It is a humbling thought, a quiet reordering of our perception of life's hierarchy. Imagine, for a final time, the silence of a Silurian sea. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of a world without the vocalizations of whales, the clicks of dolphins, the complex sounds of a modern reef. The silence of the Eurypterid world would have been broken only by the quiet scuttle of trilobites over the mud, the faint click of grasping claws, the gentle rhythmic whoosh of water being pushed aside by powerful, oar-like paddles. It is the sound of an armored world, a world of chitin and shell, moving with a deliberate alien grace. These creatures, Pterygotus and Jaekelopterus, Eurypterus and Mixopterus, are more than just fossil curiosities. They are symbols of a different kind of success. They are a testament to the fact that life, when given the opportunity, will explore every conceivable pathway, every possible form. It will create 8-foot-long, river-dwelling arthropods, just as readily as it will create saber-toothed cats or feathered dinosaurs. Their strangeness is their legacy. They serve as a profound reminder of the vast, unimaginable depth of Earth's history, of the countless chapters, the lost empires, that rose and fell long before our own story ever began. They are the quiet, armored rulers of a forgotten ocean, their fossilized forms inviting us to look beyond the familiar, to embrace the bizarre, and to stand in quiet awe of the sheer, boundless, and often alien imagination of life itself. The ghosts of these lost oceans, these armored kings, now drift peacefully back into the deep, silent repository of time from which we summoned them. And so, the ghosts of the Paleozoic seas, the great armored Eurypterids, fade back into the profound silence of deep time. Our journey to their lost kingdom, their world of shallow, warm waters, is complete. We have walked with them on ancient beaches, glimpsed their strange, compound eyes scanning the murky depths, and marveled at the sheer, impossible scale of giants like Jaekelopterus. We have witnessed the rise of their dynasty in a world empty of vertebrate kings, and stood by as we watched their long, slow twilight, as the age of fishes dawned and rendered their unique arthropod brilliance obsolete. The story of the sea scorpions is a story of a different kind of success, a different kind of ruler. It is a reminder that the world we know, the world dominated by vertebrates on land and in the sea, was not an inevitability. For over 150 million years, it was the arthropod, the sea scorpion, that held the title of apex predator, a creature of chitin and claw, ruling with silent armored efficiency. Their vanished world, so alien to our own, invites a deep sense of perspective. The vast stretches of time, the rise and fall of entire dynasties, the slow, relentless dance of evolution and extinction, all of it serves to quiet the mind, to put our own fleeting concerns into the grand, soothing context of geological time. The anxieties of a single day seem to dissolve when measured against the 200-million-year reign of an armored king. Let the images of that lost world drift gently now in your mind. The sight of a Pterygotus gliding on its powerful paddles, the patient, spiny ambush of Jaekelopterus in the mud, the vast, silent swarm of Eurypterids gathering for reasons we can only guess. Let these strange, beautiful and alien creatures recede, their forms dissolving back into the stone and silence that held their secrets for so long. The ancient seas grow still. The sound of the paddles fades. The gaze of the compound eyes turns away. What remains is the quiet of the present moment, the comfort of your surroundings, the gentle, steady rhythm of your own breath. Allow the profound, deep silence of that Paleozoic ocean to merge with the peace of your room. Let the strangeness of these lost creatures become a gentle lullaby, a story of a world so distant it demands nothing of you but quiet wonder. The journey is complete. The armored kings are at rest, and now too is your time for rest. Let the ancient currents carry you softly, gently, into the deep, quiet and welcoming waters of sleep. Rest now. Good night.